Level creation spiritual wood. Quality greater than 30 million year level. Contain divine source greater than 32,102 wisps. Note: spirit of plants and trees is extremely rare. Its medicinal properties are gentle, and ordinary people can take it. Oh my God, 30,000 divine sources? Han Fei couldn't help being shocked. If he remembered correctly, a level 7 energy crystal only contained 1,000 wisps of divine source, and a level 8 energy crystal didn't contain more than 20,000 wisps of divine source. The divine source contained in this plant was actually twice as much as a level 8 energy crystal? F*CK, isn't this a sea-quelling god-level treasure? Han Fei scanned around with his perception. There were thousands of such plants in this origin ground. Han Fei was dizzy and sighed. As expected of a divine treasure. It's unbelievable. It took Yulinka a long time to come back to herself. Although there are a lot of resources, the divine descendants and the human race need more resources. Qiu Wanren, Han Fei, I really want to kill you at this moment. Han Fei was lost for words. Come on, we should help each other. Our human race has a population of 200 billion, but we only want 30% of the resources. It's really not much. Hee. However, Qiu Wanren immediately came back to his senses. However, there's no need for you to give these resources to the human race directly. Aren't you going to build a free city in the Central Sea Divine Realm? When the time comes, you just need to bury 10 spirits of plants and trees and connect them with the ground veins, which will be equivalent to a super huge spirit gathering array that covers the entire city. Han Fei asked, what if I bury 100 of them? Qiu Wanren said angrily, too much is as bad as not enough. If you really plant 100 spirits of plants and trees, cultivators above the sea establishment realm may be very happy, but below the sea establishment realm, such an environment is not suitable. Old Fierce said, why are you two talking so much nonsense? Since you're already here, pick. Yulinka nodded. That's true. It's impossible to use up all the divine treasures at once. Let's collect some first. A moment later, when Han Fei took in nearly 1,000 spirit of plants and trees, he discovered that the spiritual energy in his origin star was unbelievably rich. Even a sky-opening realm powerhouse might not be suitable to live on. The countless clones left here by Han Song had to absorb the spiritual energy here crazily. Otherwise, the other creatures in his origin star would probably explode. Han Fei said, okay. I've collected so much this time. I can't collect anymore. I'd better get some refined stars. 3 days later. Only then did the 4 of them come out of the divine treasure. Old Fierce's face was glowing. I'm going to recover. If I've guessed right, I'll return in about 300 years. Qiu Wanren said, I'm going to cultivate in seclusion this time too. With so many spirit of plants and trees, I can try to break through to the sea quelling god realm. Yulinka asked, where are you cultivating in seclusion? Qiu Wanren said, don't worry. If anything happens in the Central Sea Divine Realm, we will know. With that, the 2 of them left eagerly. Yulinka put away the divine treasures and said to Han Fei, this time you've taken 10% of the human race's resources, and I'll temporarily keep the remaining 20% for you, okay? Han Fei said, how can I not trust you, sister-in-law? There are too many resources, and the human race doesn't need so many resources for the time being. There are still 10,000 years. We can take it slow. Han Fei sighed in his heart. 10% of the resources? He had taken 1,021 spirit of plants and trees and collected 80 million refined stars, but this was only 10% of the resources. Now that he thought about it, Xiao Wanren had cheated him of 20% of the divine treasure resources, with 3 drops of blood of all gods. He didn't know if he had made a profit or not. Another moment later, Han Fei stuffed 300 spirit of plants and trees and 20 million refined stars into Han Song's clone. Among his avatars, Han Song could eat the most. Han Song had completely digested the previous soul-purifying pearls. Loose life forms were almost everywhere in the human race now. The temporary residence of the human race in the West Wilderness was full of loose clones. Without fusing with a loose clone, Han Song had already reached the peak of an ordinary great monarch. If Han Fei wanted, Han Song could even transcend the divine tribulation now. This was the power of loose life forms. Of course, transcending the divine tribulation now was meaningless. This was because Han Song could continuously nurture powerful creatures like the demonic sources in the demon domain back then, no, stronger than demonic sources. There was even a chance for Han Song to nurture a group of loose life bodies in the great monarch realm. Of course, Han Fei didn't know how far Han Song could go yet, but Han Fei didn't mind Han Song staying in the great monarch realm for a while longer. Then, Han Fei gave Zhang Daqian 100 spirit of plants and trees and 20 million refined stars. Zhang Daqian walked the Tao of Nirvana in the giant beast. Divine Tao, and every Nirvana required a huge amount of resources, so Han Fei directly gave him 20 million refined stars. If he guessed right, this amount of resources could definitely help him reach the god-slaying level or even the sea-quelling god. However, there would no longer be battles between real strong masters in the sea realm. In the future, unless a strong master returned from the Sea of Stars, no great monarch would die in the sea realm. Therefore, after giving the resources to Zhang Daqian, Han Fei summoned the distanceless gate and let Zhang Daqian go to the chaotic sea. If the great Tao of Nirvana wanted to continuously undergo Nirvana, it needed to constantly create enemies. Only the chaotic sea was suitable for Zhang Daqian. And giant beasts could swallow all things to temper their bodies. In the Sea of Stars, he would transform into a star sea giant beast and no longer need to appear in human form. A moment later, Han Fei came to the territory of the heavenly race in the east. Sea divine realm through the distanceless gate. Many people of the heavenly race had already left the sea realm today. They didn't dare to stay for a moment. Several hours ago, the patriarch of the heavenly race passed the position of patriarch to I Ching Xue, who had once broken through the path of invincibility in the battle with Han Fei. As for the patriarch of the heavenly race, I Chongqing, and the hidden great monarch, I Chen, they had already stepped into the Sea of Stars and left the sea realm. The heavenly race was not stupid. In the East Sea divine realm, they had the deepest grudge against Han Fei. When Han Fei announced that he would change the present world to a new one, I Chongqing and I Chen knew that they had to run. Otherwise, with Han Fei's personality, if they still stayed in the sea realm, wouldn't they be courting death? I Ching Xue was a martial arts maniac and was forcibly appointed as the acting patriarch. Although she knew that Han Fei might come back to take revenge, she was only an immortal level powerhouse, and Han Fei could already kill gods. Now, if Han Fei really wanted to be fair, he probably wouldn't attack her. Of course, I Ching Shue didn't dare to take the risk, so she sealed the mountain. However, how could the heavenly race's array stop Han Fei? With a bang, the heavenly race's array had been penetrated. I Ching Shue and the monarchs were extremely nervous. They didn't expect Han Fei's revenge to come so quickly. When they came out with the determination to die, they didn't see anything. Han Fei, on the other hand, appeared in front of Neza. Among his 3 avatars, Neza needed the spirit of plants and trees the most. After all, Neza was an avatar created with the original body of the water. Immortal. The upper limit of his strength couldn't be said to be in the god realm, but it was extremely difficult for him to exceed the god realm. However, the spirit of plants and trees could change all of this. A spirit of plants and trees alone could modify the spiritual body and divine bloodline, and also increase aptitude and potential. But even so, Neza was the weakest of his 3 avatars. But it was precisely because he was weak that Han Fei handed over 9 tails, heavenly dog, and little gold to Neza to guard him and grow with him. In the past, he used to lurk in the heavenly race, but now he could use the heavenly race to hide his strength. Han Fei gave Neza 100 spirit of plants and trees and 12 million refined stars, which were enough for Neza and 9 tails to all reach the immortal level in 1,000 years, which was more than enough. As for the future law stacking, they could only wait for his return. After that, Han Fei slowly appeared in front of I Ching Shue and the others. I Ching Shue's face sank. Master Human Emperor, you're a step late. The Patriarch and the Supreme Elder have already stepped into the Sea of Stars. Now there are only us left in the heavenly race. If Master Human Emperor still wants to take revenge, you can kill or torture us as you please. Humph. Han Fei snorted and pretended to be angry. They're lucky. The ominous is about to return, but you sealed your sect. Do you want to live in seclusion? I order you to reopen your sect and give you a choice. The heavenly race can only keep 1 monarch and those sky openers who have no hope of becoming monarchs in their lives in the sea realm. As for the rest, all those above the sea establishment realm shall enter the Shattered Star Sea in 3 days, to gain experience and grow, waiting for the ominous battle in the future. Are you willing? I Ching Shue and the other monarchs were all secretly relieved. Fortunately, they would just be exiled to the Shattered Star Sea. The human emperor was fair, and the heavenly race deserved it. I Ching Shue immediately cupped her hands. As you command, Master Human Emperor. I Ching Shue didn't want to be the leader either. She was a martial arts maniac. How could she be the leader? At this moment, she wished she could take Neza and a group of strong masters of the heavenly race to the Shattered Star Sea right away. She even had a trace of hope in her heart. That should be the place she was going. One day outside. 3 years had passed on Han Fei's origin star. In the past 3 years, Han Fei didn't cultivate but lived a leisurely and happy life on his origin star. He had found the primordial purple gates. The 6 doors all ran into the path of reincarnation, but he didn't intend to enter now, so he didn't investigate further. At this moment, Han Fei, Zhang Xuanyu, and the others had just enjoyed a big meal. Han Fei and Xia Xiaochan sat alone on a mountain peak. Han Fei looked at Xia Xiaochan, and Xia Xiaochan looked at the starry sky from the Star Sea. Quagmire. Girl, I have something to tell you. Xia Xiaochan stretched her legs and said casually, go. Huh? Do you know what I'm going to say? The corners of Xia Xiaochan's mouth curled up slightly. I've already seen your reincarnation memories. That sister is quite pitiful. Go pick her up. But this time, you can't leave without saying goodbye. You have to make it clear to Yi. Otherwise, I'm afraid she'll never forgive you when you come back. Han Fei couldn't help but scratch his head awkwardly. Then he smiled in relief, gently hugged Xia Xiaochan into his arms, and looked up at the starry sky. Several days later, Han Fei and Han Chani sat opposite each other. Between the two of them, there was a chessboard. The chessboard spanned 19 paths, and the pieces were black and white. Han Fei named it the Heavenly Star Chess. Han Chani threw down the white chess piece in her hand. You've been losing 4 days. Are you the inventor of the Heavenly Star Chess? I think the Heavenly Star Chess should have been invented by Aunt Xiaobai. If it were Aunt Xiaobai, you wouldn't have been able to pass more than 30 moves. Han Fei chuckled. Doesn't this mean that my daughter is smart? Han Chani said, hee, I don't believe you. My mother said that you're good at lying. Nonsense. Ask your Uncle Kwang, Uncle Yu, or Auntie Xiaobai. I've always been honest. Unexpectedly, as soon as Han Fei said so, Luo Xiaobai replied, Don't ask me. I don't want to go against my conscience. Speechless, Han Fei looked back at Luo Xiaobai's cultivation place. Hey, how old are you? Why are you still eavesdropping? Luo Xiaobai said, I'm not eavesdropping. I'm watching chess. Han Fei gloomily set up a barrier for the two of them. With clangs, he took out an exquisite wooden box. The wooden box was made of divine bones and was engraved with extremely subtle Dao patterns and law patterns. It looked very exquisite. Han Chani narrowed her eyes slightly. You must be up to no good. Tell me. What do you want? Han Fei urged, Open it. Open it. Han Chani opened it skeptically. The box was made of more than 3,000 extremely minute accessories. As the box was opened, a beautiful tune sounded. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. Han Chani was astounded when she first heard it. The music was gentle, exquisite, and lonely, like a cloud under the moonlight, swaying in the wind. As if it was hiding a secret that couldn't be told. After the song, Han Chani burst into tears. It took her a long time to come back to herself. She hurriedly closed the box. Did you make this? I know, is it that person? Don't think I don't know. She's the only one in the entire human race who has mastered the voice of human Tao. You don't have such talent. Han Fei was stunned. This is a song I made. That's impossible. You can't even beat me in chess. Okay. Are you finally going to bring back Zhou Yingling? Han Fei was lost for words. What? I really made this. It has nothing to do with Zhou Yingling. Han Chani asked in disbelief, then why did you give me this? Han Fei raised his voice. Is it strange for a father to give his daughter something? Something's wrong. You haven't been right for the past 3 years. Something's wrong with you today. Tell me, there must be something wrong with you. Han Fei opened his mouth and sighed in the end. I'm going to do something. If I'm fast, I'll be back soon. If I'm slow, it may take me a few years. Han Chani's face immediately sank. She knew that Han Fei had something to do. The sea realm had just been pacified, and he hadn't even cultivated in seclusion, but had been living leisurely for 3 years. She had long felt that something was wrong. Just a few years? Han Fei, probably. Han Fei pondered for a moment. In the end, he couldn't tell Han Chani about him and Shiman Linglan. He hesitated for a long time and said, "Ask your mother. When I leave." Han Fei couldn't help but look serious, showing the temperament of a human emperor. "There are some things that I have to shoulder and can't escape. I've already delayed this trip for too long. I can't delay any longer." Seeing that Han Fei was so serious, Han Chani thought that Han Fei was going to do something extremely dangerous, so she immediately stopped asking. Finally, Han Chani pursed her lips and said in a low voice, "You can come back alive, right?" Han Fei was briefly stunned. He knew that Han Chani had misunderstood, but it just so happened that he should let Xia Shaochan explain this matter. Therefore, he nodded heavily. Yes. Swish. Outside the origin star, Han Fei and the others had just come out when a stream of light cut through the void, cut through the sky, and appeared in front of Han Fei. It was the blood sky blade that went to devour the soul death bell. It seemed that he had returned for a while, but Han Fei hadn't come out of his origin star, so he couldn't find him. Information popped up in Han Fei's eyes. Name, Creation Blood Sky Blade. Introduction, a high-quality nature spiritual treasure condensed from the chi and blood of the heavens from the battlefield of the gods in the primordial era. Because it fused with an ultra-quality nature spiritual treasure, the soul death bell underwent a metamorphosis. The blood sky blade's killing intent is violent. When the knife is drawn, it must be stained with blood, and when the knife is drawn, it must be fearless. If the hosts can't suppress the blood sky blade's will, it will be swallowed by the blood sky blade in the end. This knife can cut through all things and all techniques. Even if it's no match for its enemy, it will still use its full strength to fight the enemy even at the expense of being shattered. Quality, ultra-quality nature spiritual treasure. Effect 1, blood fighting intent. Whoever holds a knife can unleash double killing intent on the battlefield. Effect 2, blood drinking. This knife can drink the enemy's blood to strengthen itself. The more enemies it kills, the stronger this knife will be. Under the blood drinking state, its combat power will double. Effect 3, soul devouring. The blood sky blade can absorb the enemy's soul power in battle. If injured by the blood sky blade, it can swallow the enemy's soul. Effect 4, fight to the end. Live under the knife and die under the knife. When you're at your limit, the more you fight, the braver you become. When surrounded by enemies, you can unleash 5 times your combat power until all the enemies die. Effect 5, blade meteorite. The ultimate slash can unleash 5 to 20 times the combat power according to the user's strength. After this slash, the knife body will shatter, and you have to eat a spiritual treasure of the same level to revive. Can't be reforged. Refined. Note: born for slaughter, die for slaughter. Buzz. It's good that you're back. Swish. This is? Words appeared on the distanceless gate. This is an entrance to the river of eternal darkness, but it's not very stable. There are endless void turbulences. I've never been there. Han Fei nodded slightly. That's enough. Old distanceless, thanks. It was fine as long as there was an entrance. Anyway, he had the vast ocean navigator. How could he get lost? Han Fei had seen too many void turbulences. With his current strength, it was Impossible for this to stop him. After the distanceless gate left, Han Fei stepped into the unstable void. Without hesitation. As Han Fei stepped in, he felt that there were countless chaotic space suction forces around him, trying to pull him in. Buzz. Han Fei activated his original Great Tao and increased his strength to the level of sea-quelling god. He held the vast ocean navigator with one hand. As the needle spun, Han Fei shuttled through the countless spatial cracks and the edges of the holes. With Han Fei's current speed, after using the vast ocean navigator only once, he had passed through tens of millions of spatial cracks in a row and came to a void enveloped in darkness. Han Fei felt the eternal darkness in his body tremble slightly, resonating with this void. This is the place. Swish. When Han Fei disappeared into the darkness, all the unstable void around disappeared, and he heard the sound of the tide. So dark? There was almost no visibility here. Although this darkness was not as difficult to detect as Little Black's original body, it was still quite difficult to walk in it. Han Fei tried his perception, only to see that the visual range was still very small, less than 1,000 kilometers, and his perception picture was extremely gray, as if his perception ability had been reduced. With a perception of less than 1,000 kilometers, the speed of a sea-quelling god was a little wasteful. Han Fei immediately returned to his normal strength. Clatter. A wave hit Han Fei, making him a little unsteady. This wave was not water, but a wave of laws, but this law seemed a little strange. In addition to pain, this wave also had corrosive power. Because he didn't deliberately resist it, he could feel that this power was attached to his body and trying to corrode him. Han Fei immediately suppressed his anger, restored his consciousness, and began to feel the power of the river of eternal darkness. A law of horror? No, it's not just the terrifying law. It also contains some mixed power of laws and energy tides. There's even a little power of divine source in the energy? Interesting. At this moment, in addition to the sound of waves, there were countless ravings in Han Fei's ears. He didn't know where they came from, nor did he know what creature made them. It seemed to be a kind of raving that came from the river of eternal darkness itself. Han Fei's will was firm. Ignoring the interference, he held the vast ocean navigator in his hand. Where is Shiman Linglan? Ka ka ka. When the needle pointed clearly, Han Fei was slightly relieved and didn't dare to stop. Although his perception range was only 1,000 kilometers, he didn't necessarily need perception. With his current strength, it shouldn't be a problem for him to break through the unknown space. However, when Han Fei tried to move forward quickly, he felt billions of layers of resistances pressing on him. Damn it! With Han Fei's current strength, even if he didn't activate his original Great Tao, he still had the combat power of a god. But even so, Han Fei only covered less than 800 kilometers with each step he took. Then, he would be slapped back by the tide of the river of eternal darkness by another 300 kilometers. Therefore, with his strength in the divine realm, he only covered 500 kilometers with each step. This was a little ridiculous. Han Fei knew that the river of eternal darkness couldn't be simple, but he didn't expect it to be so difficult. This river was difficult and dangerous, like walking against the wind in a sea of sand. Even a god was restricted to this extent, which was really beyond his expectations. If this goes on, how long will it take to reach Shiman Linglan? Even in the sea realm, it was easily several light years away. And this was The Sea of Stars. Han Fei had no idea where Shiman Linglan was at this moment. He just had a direction. If he moved forward at this speed, he couldn't imagine how much time he would have to spend here. Han Fei tried for a moment longer, walking against the eternal darkness tide. After 100 seconds, he had only traveled 300,000 kilometers. No. Han Fei immediately activated his original Great Tao, hoping to pass through with the strength of a sea-quelling god. However, before he could activate his original Great Tao, he perceived a huge, meatball-like thing. Han Fei's pupils were constricted when he saw the meatball. This thing spanned about 300 kilometers. There seemed to be various broken limbs on the ball, and they were not the limbs of one creature, but the limbs of countless creatures. On the ball, there were tens of thousands of eyes, which looked all different. If these could be described as aberrations, then the meatball had a big mouth that was chewing the corpse of a certain creature. The spherical creature had clearly discovered Han Fei. It spat out the half of the remains in its mouth and flew towards Han Fei with a smile. That smile was extremely strange and creepy. Because when this thing smiled, countless broken limbs on the ball began to twist and shake. Some of the broken limbs even tried to grab something as if they were alive. Damn it. Because his perception range was limited, as soon as this strange ball appeared, it was as if it was right in front of him. Han Fei raised his hand and punched. The power of the divine realm and the source power of the sea quelling god made Han Fei's casual punch like a powerful god's punch. Bang! Half of the big ball was shattered by the punch, and countless limbs flew everywhere. Some were directly annihilated by Han Fei, but the parts that weren't annihilated still crawled back to the meatball. At the same time, the giant ball stuck out a tongue, which was completely made of laws. Han Fei turned into a void hand and grabbed the tongue. At the same time, information popped up in his eyes. Name: Fear Undead. Introduction: a creature that died in despair. When it was alive, it was dominated by fear and fell into the river of eternal darkness, turning into a fear undead. Every creature's fear is different, so the fear undead has all kinds of strange forms. If you are invaded by the fear undead, you may lose yourself and become a part of eternal darkness. If a living person enters this place, he should be fearless. Otherwise, it will be extremely difficult for him to walk out. Level 119. Realm: Great Monarch. Contained Law of Fear: a little. Battle Technique: uncertain. Collectible: Origin of the Dead. Unabsorbable. Remarks: the origin of the dead can strengthen all non-undead creatures. Fear undead? Immediately, Han Fei felt that a power similar to soul poison began to corrode his void hand. A mere great monarch dares to be so fierce? Kill. Clang. The blood sky blade was instantly unsheathed and the immortal slaying knife shot out. The power of the surrounding laws was attracted and instantly swept past the strange ball, cutting it into hundreds or thousands of pieces. Huh? Han Fei's first reaction was to cut off the connection between this place and the river of life, only to find, to his surprise, that this thing had no breath of life. To be precise, this was not life at all. What the hell is that? Those broken limbs were sent flying everywhere. Even if they were lifeless, under the effect of source power, they should have all been annihilated. But there were still a few broken limbs that surged towards Han Fei. Humph. A light of purification burst out of Han Fei's body, purifying the broken limbs. Han Fei wasn't surprised that there was a creature in the river of eternal darkness, but this creature was too strange. It was simply a mixture of countless strange things, and didn't look like a creature formed alone. Besides, the combat power of this creature didn't seem to be weak. If an ordinary great monarch were here, he would definitely fight a fierce battle. But Han Fei didn't give the creature a chance to attack. After this creature was completely purified, there was still a power left in the air. It was a dark spherical energy body. The moment the spherical energy body appeared, Han Fei felt the abnormality of the eternal darkness spiritual heritage. Origin of the dead? This thing should be the only thing he could collect from the fear undead. It seemed to be able to resonate with the eternal darkness spiritual heritage. Han Fei approached the spherical energy. In the next moment, the spherical energy seemed to be attracted by his body and surged over. Han Fei didn't resist. Since it could resonate with the eternal darkness spiritual heritage, it meant that this thing should be a power that could be controlled. Sure enough, when the spherical energy entered his body, it was immediately absorbed by the eternal darkness spiritual heritage and then completely fused into the eternal darkness spiritual heritage. Huh? Han Fei couldn't help but feel that his strength seemed to have been slightly strengthened. When he looked at the demon purification pot, he found that his source power had been strengthened by more than 20 points. Although it wasn't much, it had indeed been strengthened. However, this spherical energy was clearly not source power, but it could strengthen him. This meant that after absorbing this thing, he could activate the slow improvement of the Supreme Divine Technique. Unfortunately, he didn't know how many such creatures there were. On this road, he only encountered this ball. If the number of the undead of fear was small, then it was far from enough to improve himself by absorbing the origin of these dead people. Therefore, Han Fei didn't pay much attention to it. He still activated his original Great Tao. When his strength increased to the level of sea-quelling god, Han Fei stepped in again and plunged into this darkness. Because his perception range was limited, Han Fei didn't know what was ahead. After his strength soared, the eternal darkness tide could no longer stop Han Fei. This leap covered hundreds of thousands of kilometers, and his speed increased by about 200 times. Although it was still very slow in Han Fei's eyes, it was better than a great monarch. Bang! After only 3 seconds, Han Fei felt that his body was hit by a certain force. He scanned around with his perception and was stunned. He had crashed into a tower-type building. Han Fei didn't expect buildings to appear here. Was there a city in the river of eternal darkness? Han Fei immediately stopped and scanned around with his perception, only to find that this so-called abandoned tower seemed to be made of some kind of skeleton. However, many giant skeletons were embedded in this 6-sided tower. Ka. The tower was full of cracks after being hit by Han Fei. Then, the skeletons twisted and struggled out of the tower. In the next moment, they all rushed at Han Fei. Han Fei stomped, and ripples spread. With bangs, explosions sounded one after another. In the blink of an eye, these skeletons were shattered. Not weak, but only about the carefree level. Being easily shattered by Han Fei, the tower was completely shattered. In the next moment, Han Fei saw a huge weird skeleton covered in gray skin appear in front of him. This skeleton only had the upper half of its body, and half of its head was a skeleton, and the other half was full of tentacles. On its 2 arms, there were 7 or 8 pairs of skeleton hands. He tried to shake it with the power of the sea-quelling god, but it didn't shatter, which meant that the other party's strength was at least at the level of a god. Han Fei took a closer look. It was indeed at the god level. However, this level was just a symbol. Han Fei didn't believe that this thing could transcend a divine tribulation. It should be condensed from some power in the river of eternal darkness, giving him the power of a god. Han Fei slapped back with the power of purification, shattering one of the skeleton's arms. The latter roared in pain, and 7 or 8 pairs of hands on his other hand aimed at Han Fei. In the next moment, dozens of dark rays stabbed at Han Fei. Such an attack naturally couldn't shake Han Fei. Han Fei didn't need to do anything. He just needed to activate the surrounding laws to block it. However, Han Fei took the initiative to withstand this wave of impact. He felt the fusion of dozens of laws, so this blow was actually not weak even in the divine realm. However, the other party's power only had a little power of the divine source. Han Fei confirmed that this power didn't come from the skeleton itself, but from the river of eternal darkness. Therefore, if this skeleton fought a real godly powerhouse, even the most ordinary god could easily kill it. Bang! Han Fei crushed the huge skeleton into powder. In the next moment, a large mass of the power of the origin of the dead and dozens of small masses of the origin of the dead were absorbed into his body. This time, perhaps because the power of the source of the dead was a little more, Han Fei felt it more clearly. He felt that after this power was absorbed by the eternal darkness spiritual heritage, the power that escaped from the eternal darkness spiritual heritage circulated between the eternal darkness spiritual heritage and the origin spiritual heritage, finally gathering in the black hole and turning into origin power. Has the supreme divine technique been activated? Han Fei was a little happy and a little worried. He was happy that the subsequent growth of the supreme divine technique was very passive. Han Fei had eaten the spirit of plants and trees and had thought that the source power contained in the spirit of plants and trees would be quickly absorbed, driving the growth of the supreme divine technique. Logically speaking, as long as he didn't encounter a bottleneck, there was still a lot of room for improvement in the supreme divine technique. However, the power of the spirit of plants and trees was scattered throughout his body, as if it had been stored. Although it did make the passive growth of the supreme divine technique a little faster, in his estimation, it would take hundreds of years to completely digest a spirit of plants and trees. But now, the source of the dead could actually activate the rapid growth of the supreme divine technique, and it was activated with spiritual heritage. Could it be that the supreme divine technique was related to spiritual heritage? Han Fei sensed that this time, his origin power had grown by about 300 points. Nearly 10 times more than before. How far had he gone? It was only 1,000,000 kilometers, but the river of eternal darkness already had a god-level fear undead. It might not be a good thing if the fear undead appeared too frequently, because it was impossible for him to activate his original great Tao all the time. Besides, now that a god had appeared, would there be any god-slaying level or even sea-quelling god-level fear undead in the future? Several hours passed. Han Fei still returned to the great monarch realm. During this period, he did encounter a lot of fear undead, but most of them were below the great monarch realm. The origin of the dead he could collect was limited. More than 1,000 of them only provided an increase of less than 3,000 points of origin power. During this period, he only encountered 2 god-level fear undead, but he didn't see any stronger ones. However, this was only an improvement for a few hours. After he rested for a while, he could try to do it again. About a month passed. Han Fei would use the vast ocean navigator to fine-tune the direction every day, and in this month, his origin power had increased by more than 100,000 points. If he had known that the river of eternal darkness would increase his strength so much, Han Fei might have come long ago. After another month and a half, Han Fei found that he had reached a bottleneck. Information popped up in Han Fei's eyes. Owner, Han Fei. Level, 119, Great Monarch. Bloodline ranking among the clans in the Infinite Ocean, the second. Origin power, 7,999,999. First spiritual heritage, origin spiritual heritage. Second spiritual heritage, eternal darkness spiritual heritage. First spiritual beast, twin yin-yang sky-swallowing fish, level 119. Second spiritual beast, Emperor Sparrow, level 119. Main art, supreme divine technique, God-fiend body. Is this the limit? The breakthrough of the God-fiend body showed Han Fei a new limit. However, this new limit was not too high, such as directly giving Han Fei 1,000,000 combat power. However, a peak-level Great Monarch with 800,000 combat power might not have existed in the history of the Sea Realm, even if it was the creator of the supreme divine technique. Han Fei knew that at this point in strength, it probably meant the end of the Great Monarch realm. If he wanted to improve further, he would probably have to take the rest of the path. The god of war had stagnated here for millions of years, but he didn't have millions of years left. He could only study it with old pedants like Qiu Wanren when he returned. Another 2 months passed. There was no need for Han Fei to attack the fearful undead, because the source of the dead was meaningless to him. After Han Fei entered the river of eternal darkness for a year, he saw all kinds of dark creatures. Most of them were different, but some were very similar. For example, a faceless humanoid crawling monster bathed in black flames. Han Fei named it the Slave of Flame. For example, a kind of black mask that often appeared out of nowhere, the kind of mask that tried to put itself on Han Fei's face. Of course, they never succeeded. Han Fei called it the Dark Mask. For example, skeleton soldiers were relatively common. For example, a kind of weird body with mixed limbs. It was called Limb Monster by Han Fei. After such a long time, Han Fei had discovered one of their special characteristics, which was that most of these creatures mastered the law of fear. It was not that they should have mastered this law in the first place, but that the river of eternal darkness had given them this law. Han Fei guessed that it might be some creatures that died under the law of fear. Some part of their souls might be immersed in the river of eternal darkness, and then these souls entangled each other, giving birth to these monsters that were lifeless, but could survive. Therefore, the river of eternal darkness could actually be called the river of fear. Because he often interacted with these strange creatures, Han Fei had mastered the law of fear extremely well now. 2 years after entering the river of eternal darkness. On this day, Han Fei activated his original Great Tao as usual and traveled with the strength of a god. Suddenly, he hit a huge object that looked like a mountain. More importantly, it wasn't shattered by his power. When Han Fei scanned around with his perception, he immediately exclaimed, because he saw a huge fish head. It was a big black fish with a mouth full of sharp teeth and two eyes like two stars. With his perception range, he could only see half of the big fish head. The big fish seemed to be a little puzzled. It didn't do anything but was suddenly hit. When he saw Han Fei, he seemed to be interested. He immediately opened his mouth and roared at Han Fei. In an instant, infinite terrifying laws blew past Han Fei. As for Han Fei, he protected himself with the light of purification and was not disturbed by this power. Boom! Han Fei punched back, blasting a hole in the big fish's head. In the next moment, Han Fei saw a dense small fish blowing bubbles in the fish's head, repairing the hole in the blink of an eye. Quelling God level? Han Fei was shocked. This was the first time in a year that he had encountered a quelling God level fear undead in the river of eternal darkness. However, this big fish seemed to be composed of countless small fish. Han Fei immediately realized that this was another undead combination body. Roar! Seeing that this person actually injured him, the big fish immediately roared. Han Fei felt that his scalp was a little numb, as if some power was trying to shake his soul and invade his body. In the next moment, Han Fei saw the heavenly Tao Dharma eye appear beside him. The flowing chaotic nether river, and even a god-slaying level ominous creature. Illusion. Han Fei immediately made a judgment. It was fine if the heavenly Tao Dharma eye and the chaotic nether river appeared, but what was with the ominous creatures? Could it be that the ominous had opened a channel in the river of eternal darkness? Wasn't that asking for destruction? There were so many undead creatures here, and the law of fear was everywhere. There must be something wrong with the ominous to come here to fight. Therefore, Han Fei concluded that this was an illusion. Thunder fire. With a swish, 1,000 kilometers around Han Fei was instantly filled with thunder and fire. The lightning had the ability to purify evil. It was impossible for a mere illusion to resist the power of the quelling God-level lightning and fire. In the lightning and fire, the heavenly Tao Dharma eye, the nether river, and the ominous creature were overturned and instantly purified before they could attack. A large number of holes were burnt on the big fish's head by the lightning and fire, and countless small fish were annihilating inside. Roar! The big fish opened its mouth, and millions of small fish formed a tide and surged out. Although the lightning and fire were ferocious, they could only burn the outermost layer. World Destruction Fist. The Star Fist technique was domineering and arrogant. When the fish tide was about to submerge Han Fei, the fist smashed out, leaving a vacuum. But in the next moment, Han Fei saw that the big fish's mouth covered his perception. It was trying to eat him. Sword 5, shattering. Time arcane technique. Swish, swish. 2 consecutive peak-level strikes cut open the fish head, and the slash marks extended out of his perception. At the same time, thousands of lightning bolts burst out around Han Fei, crazily purifying the strange fish. This time, the big fish was finally killed. Han Fei couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. Fortunately, his peak combat power had been increased to 8 million, which had reached the standard of ordinary quelling gods. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so easy to deal with. Feeling the abnormality of the eternal darkness spiritual heritage, the source of the dead entered Han Fei's body. Although it should be a lot, it couldn't increase Han Fei's strength. It seems that I have to reserve a certain amount of combat power for the rest of the way. Otherwise, it will be difficult to encounter this monster again. Han Fei recovered a little and continued to set off. 3 years. 5 years. Without Shimin Linglan's precise location, Han Fei could only search slowly. In the 7th year, Han Fei was already numb. Every day, except for rushing, he experienced some trivial battles. Of course, he also had to withstand the baptism and corrosion of the river of eternal darkness that was comparable to hellfire. 7 years later, Han Fei still rushed to the unknown area of the river of eternal darkness. Boom. This was the umpteenth time Han Fei had bumped into something. He instinctively prepared to enter combat mode. However, when he took a closer look, he was surprised to see that this was a cage barrier completely made of the law of time. Buzz. Han Fei was refreshed and overjoyed. Had he finally found her? Han Fei scanned around with his perception. This time cage was very strong. But it didn't block the tide of the river of eternal darkness. This meant that the purpose of this barrier was just to get rid of some fearful undead. With his time law, it wouldn't be a problem for him to enter. Just as Han Fei was trying to blend into the light ball cage, suddenly, in front of him, time intertwined and turned into a man in a green battle suit. Master Human Emperor, you're finally here. Who is it? Han Fei frowned slightly. Yuan Kong, the third master of the Time Temple, has been waiting for a long time. You want to stop me? Han Fei was a little surprised. Shimin Linglan only had the strength of a peak level great monarch, right? Even if she was the 7th temple master, the Time Temple shouldn't continue to offend him for a great monarch. After all, the ominous had come back. Wasn't the most important thing now to deal with the ominous? Yuan Kong said indifferently, I'm not trying to stop Master Human Emperor. But Shimin Linglan is not so easy to save. To be honest, even if I let you in now, you won't be able to save her. Han Fei sneered. Really? Since you know that I can't save her, why are you standing here? Yuan Kong smiled. Help you. Help me? Han Fei felt that he had heard something funny, but then he asked, Oh? How? Can you help me? Yuan Kong said leisurely, Master Human Emperor, you should know what the strongest power of the Time Temple is, right? 6 divine time techniques? The 6 divine techniques of time were too famous. So far, Han Fei had only seen 2. The first was the time resurrection technique, which could be said to be extremely powerful. As long as he could get the corresponding ancient corpses and other resources, he could temporarily resurrect ancient powerhouses. And in history, there were countless powerful creatures who were as many as carps crossing the river. This divine technique alone could help the Time Temple establish an extraordinary status in this sea of stars. The other 6 divine technique of time was naturally time acceleration, similar to the time chain of the demon purification pot. Han Fei had never personally witnessed this divine technique, but in the 100,000 year competition in the East Sea Divine Realm, the space-time cultivation bead rewarded was refined with this technique. It seemed that the Time Temple's time acceleration technique should be an auxiliary divine technique, but it could separate time. It was quite different from the time chain of the demon purification pot. After all, the space-time cultivation bead could be used by anyone, and the time chain could only be used in his origin star. As for the other 4 of the 6 divine techniques of time, Han Fei really didn't know. Han Fei couldn't help but sneer. Are you going to teach me? Master Human Emperor is indeed smart. This was something Han Fei never expected. Are the people of the Time Temple out of their minds? He wasn't even a member of the Time Temple, and they wanted to teach him the 6 divine techniques of time? Yuan Kong said, in the past, the Time Temple invited you many times. In fact, you should have agreed. With your omnipotent combat power, if you walk the great Tao of time to the extreme, you will be a very terrifying existence. Heh. Han Fei said casually, if the Time Temple had such a layout back then, I might have joined. However, there is no free lunch in the world. Why did you teach me the 6 divine techniques of time? Return to the ancient times and return to the chaotic era to find a way to defeat the ominous. Han Fei narrowed his eyes slightly. Oh? This time, Han Fei was a little surprised. He said, return to the chaotic era? Do you think so highly of me? As far as I know, no one can go back to the chaotic era, right? Even if someone can, shouldn't it be the master of time? Why are you looking for me? Yuan Kong shook his head slightly. Although my master is strong, going against the current doesn't just depend on strength. Going against the flow of time requires endless lifespan and endless spiritual power. But this is only the basic condition. To enter that era, one needs the approval of that era. My master can touch the time of that era, but he can't enter that era. So far, our Time Temple has only found one person who has this power to cross eras. Han Fei narrowed his eyes. Me? No, it's Shiman Linglan. Linglan? Han Fei was stunned. How could Shiman Linglan do something that even the master of time couldn't do? Yuan Kong said, Shiman Linglan can enter the Time Temple not because she comprehended the great Tao of time, but because she comprehended an indestructible power. Hope? That's right. Yuan Kong also sighed. This is a technique that has never appeared in the sea of stars. It's her unique Tao. This Tao is no weaker than time, the void, death, life, fear, and all other powerful great Taos. As far as we know, none of the myriad Taos in the world can suppress her Tao of hope. Therefore, she has the potential to dominate. However, there's not much time left in the sea of stars. She appeared too late. We don't have time to wait for her to grow. Besides. And what? Yuan Kong looked at Han Fei deeply. Besides, we found that this Tao has a big drawback. This Tao can be destroyed. This Tao was born because of you, so it can also be destroyed because of you. This is because if you die, her hope will be gone, so this Tao should be destroyed. This is why she has been unable to break through to become a god, but she can still be ranked as the 7th Temple Master. Han Fei's face darkened slightly. As long as I'm here, this Tao won't be destroyed. Besides, since Linglan has the power to enter that era, it doesn't mean that I can enter that era, right? Yuan Kong said, you have the possibility of entering that era. First of all, what I can be sure of is that you have the ability to touch that era with the law of life alone. If you want to enter that era, you need the approval of that era. And your identity as the human emperor might be able to fool the heavenly Tao. Han Fei frowned. Yuan Kong's words were too mysterious and unbelievable. So, is this the purpose of you teaching me the 6 divine time techniques? Yuan Kong smiled and said, you've become a disciple of the Void Temple and comprehended the Death Tao of the Immortal Temple. Don't you want to obtain the 6 divine techniques of the Time Temple? In this era, there is ultimately a need for a real strong master. Mortals are mediocre, and there are countless examples of former heavenly talents who are now down and out. The only purpose of the Void Temple is to nurture true strong masters, so if everyone in the Void Temple is given enough time, they can be a top powerhouse who can suppress an era. They are very strong, but not strong enough. What the Void Temple wants is an existence who can break the taboo, and our Time Temple is willing to help, but not everyone can comprehend the 6 divine techniques of time. If you want to comprehend this technique, it depends on your own luck. Han Fei put on a faint smile. Okay. Someone gave me the 6 divine techniques of time for free. How can I not dare to accept it? Yuan Kong slowly raised his head and said proudly, "Defeat me." Defeat you? Han Fei glanced at Yuan Kong. You're only a peak-level great monarch. I'm afraid you can't even take one blow from me. Yuan Kong raised his voice slightly. Han Fei, the peak-level great monarch of the Time Temple, is not as weak as you think. In time, it's not impossible for great monarchs to suppress the sea. Come and fight me. After all the strong masters of the 3 temples were proud and aloof. Behind Yuan Kong, a time tide surged ceaselessly, and an ancient divine python appeared behind him. This was not the time resurrection technique, but Yuan Kong's companion spirit. The primordial divine python had a single horn, spewed green light from its mouth, and gathered purple lightning on its horn. It was magnificent. Yuan Kong waved his hand, and a time tide turned into a time sword tide and surged over. Very strong. You can fight a god. However, if you don't use the time resurrection technique, I'm afraid you won't be a match for me with such an attack. Han Fei hadn't even activated his original Great Dao. The enemy had a tide of swords, yet I could slash waves with a single move. Swish. He drew his broadsword and slashed, and the power of time surged on it. Perhaps the law of time that Han Fei mastered was not as good as Yuan Kong's. But he was very familiar with breaking all laws with strength. Puff. Clang. With a single slash, he cut through the tide in front of him, and a surging wave swept over. With the enhancement of origin power, how could ordinary strength resist it? With a single slash, the tide split, and Yuan Kong's body exploded. The knife light didn't stop, and when the knife slashed at the time barrier, a rumbling sound erupted. In the time barrier, Shiman Linglan was wearing a broken battle suit. Because of the corrosion of the eternal dark tide, her battle suit had long decayed. Not only the battle suit, but even most of Shiman Linglan's body had decayed. Her limbs were shackled by the time chains, and she leaned against a white bone tombstone, barely having a place to lean. At this moment, in front of Shiman Linglan, stood a beautiful woman. The beautiful woman said, "Linglan, the master of the void, gave you a void. Why don't you use it? If you use it, you won't have to suffer so much." Clang. Clang. Shiman Linglan's arm moved slightly, and the white Dao bones on her wrist collided with the chains. "Moss. Master, you're here? This is the punishment I deserve. Although it's a punishment, it's also cultivation. In 100,000 years, when I come out of seclusion, it will be the day I become a god." The beautiful woman heaved a long sigh. Even if he becomes a god, so what? Can you forget him after you become a god? Shiman Linglan turned her head slightly, and only her bones and rotten flesh were left on her cheek. A trace of pity appeared in the beautiful woman's eyes. Linglan, I know you are still angry with him, but is there a need to torture yourself like this? You should know that the last time you saw him, he hadn't proved Dao yet. Although he is a genius and has already reached the immortal level, how long will it take for him to stack laws? He doesn't even know that you are suffering such torture here. Why? Master. Cough. Shimin Linglan wanted to raise her head, but with the sick soul devouring alls on her body, every time she moved, it was as if her entire body and soul were torn apart. Master, I'm not waiting for him. Child, do you know that his wife has been resurrected? Shimin Linglan's body trembled slightly. Okay. The beautiful woman continued, he gave birth to a daughter named Han Chani. She's extremely talented and can be said to be a rare genius. Okay. The beautiful woman sat down beside Shimin Linglan and said unhurriedly, he's here. Okay. Huh? Shimin Linglan suddenly raised her head. Although her body and soul were enduring inhuman pain, she still raised her head and looked at the beautiful woman in shock. Clang. At this moment, a loud bang erupted on this time barrier, and the vibration sound spread into the barrier. The beautiful woman extended her hand, and the scene outside the barrier appeared. When Shimin Linglan saw that figure, she felt her soul tremble. Then, ignoring the pain on her body, she shouted in a low voice, Master, let him go. Let him go quickly. Shimin Linglan clearly panicked. She even wanted to drag the time chain, but her strength was all locked by the soul devouring all and couldn't completely move the time chain. The beautiful woman said indifferently, Linglan, your judgment of people is indeed not bad. This guy is growing very fast, unbelievably fast. Look, Yuan Kong fought with all his strength, but in the end, he couldn't even withstand a single slash from this guy. Master, for the sake of us being master and disciple, let him go. Even though half of Shimin Linglan's face was rotten, one could still see the anxiety and fear on her face. The beautiful woman turned around and looked at Shimin Linglan. The barrier contains the time-killing technique set up by our Lord, but you still want to let him leave, without even mind sacrificing our relationship as master and disciple, right? Shimin Linglan roared, after all, he is from the Void Temple. If you attack him, the Void Temple won't let it go. Master. Alas. The beautiful woman sighed slightly. Look, as long as you see him, you can't calm down. Look down. Outside the barrier. Han Fei was frowning. If it were an ordinary great monarch, he would believe that the other party had no chance to fight back. However, this person was the third temple master of the Time Temple. If the Time Temple calculated strength according to ranking, this person definitely shouldn't be so weak that he couldn't even withstand a single slash from him. Sure enough, in the next moment, time intertwined, and a piece of time formed Yuan Kong's body. As I expect. Seeing Yuan Kong appear again, Han Fei felt that it was normal. However, he felt that something was wrong. The power that the other party burst out just now was definitely Yuan Kong's original body. And with the strength of a peak-level great monarch, it was impossible for him to withstand the slash he launched, so how did he revive? Han Fei's heart skipped a beat. This is one of the 6 divine techniques of time. Yuan Kong smiled. That's right. This is the indestructible time of the 6 divine time techniques. A time wave appeared behind Yuan Kong again, but this time was different from before. Just now, Yuan Kong knew that he was no match for Han Fei, but he still deliberately fought Han Fei to show the time indestructibility technique. Now, around Han Fei, the laws of time were intertwined in all directions. One Yuan Kong after another and one time wave after another surrounded Han Fei. Swish. 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 It was still the time sword tide. This time, nearly 1,000 Yuan Kong attacked at the same time. This technique was almost completely a super upgraded version of the time arcane technique. It could launch 1,000 attacks in an instant. If they were in the same realm, who could resist it? Even if Han Fei could kill Yuan Kong with one slash without activating his original Great Tao, could he kill 1,000 Yuan Kongs? When the 1,000 sword tides of time rushed at Han Fei in the barrier, Shiman Linglan looked at the beautiful woman in despair and said anxiously, "Master." This was because Shiman Linglan knew the power of this technique. This was a cross-realm god-slaying technique. She had only been suppressed for less than 1,000 years. Although Han Fei was talented and had already entered the Great Monarch realm, how could he block such an attack? The beautiful woman didn't respond to Shiman Linglan, and just when Shiman Linglan felt that it was impossible for Han Fei to resist this blow, Han Fei's strength soared, and the blood sky blade appeared in front of him. Immortal slaying. The immortal slaying knife instantly extracted the power of the heavenly Tao. Here and slashed out at a speed so fast that even great monarchs couldn't see it clearly. Bang! 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 With a single slash, he cut off the 1,000 sword tides. The 1,000 Yuan Kongs were shattered at the same time. At this moment, Shiman Linglan was already struggling to stand up as if she had made an important decision. Suddenly, she froze. She almost couldn't believe her eyes. The time-splitting technique failed? The beautiful woman said indifferently, "Sit down. It's not that the time splitting technique has failed, but that Yuan Kong's strength is limited. With his strength, he can kill gods, but he won't be able to deal with a god slaying level powerhouse. And if he faces a sea-quelling god, of course he will lose." Sea-quelling god? Shiman Linglan's heart skipped a beat. "Master, what's going on?" The beautiful woman said leisurely, "Although I don't know how Han Fei did it. He can indeed unleash the combat power of a sea-quelling god in a short period of time. Oh, maybe this time is not short, but for us, no matter how long it takes, it's short." "How did he?" The beautiful woman smiled. "You want to know? Then wait for him to tell you himself." Shiman Linglan's heart skipped a beat. How could she meet him in such a state? When she resolutely broke into the time river, she didn't panic. She would rather be suppressed in the river of eternal darkness than panic. But at this moment, she finally panicked. Outside the barrier, Yuan Kong's body reappeared. Han Fei said, "All of you are your original bodies. No wonder the Time Temple can bear the responsibility of resisting the ominous army. What's the name of this technique?" Yuan Kong smiled and said, "Time-splitting technique. Splitting himself from different times and simultaneously stacking these times into the current time?" Han Fei nodded slightly. He knew how terrifying this technique was. If he mastered such a power, he would probably be invincible in the sea-quelling divine realm. It didn't even need to be him. If the Time Temple had a sea-quelling god, he suspected that even Lei Heng and Senior Brother Six God couldn't resist such a terrifying power. Of course, the premise was that they didn't have any trump cards. Han Fei thought for a moment. It's impossible for you to unleash such a powerful force at any time. It's impossible for there to be no limit to trigger different times at the same time. Yuan Kong didn't hide it. This blow does need to be prepared. In a battle, with my strength, I can only unleash 3 bodies, not 1,000. This blow just now will take at least 1,000 days for me to prepare. Phew. In that case, it's not bad. If this technique could be used through time acceleration, for example, on his origin star, it would only take 1 day to set up a trap and launch such a blow. If Master of Time took the initiative to use this technique, how powerful would it be? Obviously, this technique should have other restrictions. Otherwise, it would be too heaven-defying. Yuan Kong shook his head slightly. But that blow just now was only part of the power of the time-splitting technique. Han Fei said, "It seems that you've mastered the 6 divine techniques of time. Well, I also want to see what the other 2 divine techniques are." No rush. You have plenty of time to feel it. There's no rush. Come on. Let me see what else you have. Han Fei was not in a hurry to learn, nor was Yuan Kong in a hurry to teach him. The current confrontation was just foreplay. A huge humanoid skull appeared in front of Yuan Kong. Time resurrection technique? Han Fei was a little puzzled. Yuan Kong should know that he had already mastered the time resurrection technique, right? It was meaningless to use this technique to deal with him, unless Yuan Kong could revive Dominator level creatures. Otherwise, even if Yuan Kong really resurrected a sea-quelling god level creature, he might not be able to beat it, but he could definitely hold on until Yuan Kong couldn't maintain the time resurrection technique. But in the next moment, Han Fei felt the law of time ripple, and a huge ball cage intertwined with time blocked the range of his perception. Han Fei slashed back. He was just puzzled. With Yuan Kong's strength, it was obviously impossible for him to trap him in this time cage. But he still set it up, which meant that there must be something wrong with this cage. However, after Han Fei slashed out again, the cage voluntarily turned incorporeal and disappeared without a trace, and this place was filled with a rich law of time. Roar. At this moment, Yuan Kong had already resurrected the humanoid skull. An ancient demon ape appeared under the interweaving of the law of time. There was no need to feel it. Just from the suppressing pressure emanating from the other party, Han Fei knew that this demon ape must be at the sea-quelling god level. How many seconds can you last before the sea-quelling god level resurrected creature? Han Fei had some experience in dealing with giant apes. Of course, he just needed to break all laws with strength. Bang! The fists and rods collided, and the power shook the heavens and the earth. After all, it was a power at the level of sea-quelling god. Just the power that dissipated was not something Yuan Kong could withstand, so Yuan Kong directly retreated. As for Han Fei, he was sent flying by the rod. But this place was only so big. And the entire cage was only 1,000 kilometers long. For the 2 sea-quelling gods, this space was too narrow. Therefore, Han Fei was crushed on an invisible barrier by the rod. Han Fei realized that this demon ape was much stronger than him. In this narrow space, he didn't even have many chances to escape. When the demon ape tried to hit Han Fei with the time stick in its hand, with a bang, Han Fei dodged with the extraordinary speed of the 1,000 thunder flash. Bam! Bam. Bam. Boom, boom, boom. After only 10 seconds, Han Fei estimated that the other party's strength was at least 50% higher than his. Although he had mastered the Thousand Thunder Flash, the space was narrow after all, so he was still hit hundreds of times by this ancient demon ape. After more than 20 seconds, the ancient demon ape faded away. This must be Yuan Kong's limit. Just as Han Fei was about to investigate why this space could withstand the power of the sea-quelling god, he saw Yuan Kong appear out of nowhere. No rush. You have plenty of time to feel it. Yuan Kong said this for no reason. In the next moment, a huge humanoid skull appeared in front of Yuan Kong. Han Fei suddenly realized something. In order to confirm his guess, Han Fei fought the same battle again, which ended in more than 20 seconds. In the next moment, Yuan Kong appeared out of nowhere and said again, "No rush. You have plenty of time to feel it." In the next moment, another huge humanoid skull appeared in front of Yuan Kong. Time is repeating. Wasn't this the time cycle technique he created? Han Fei had once made a deal with Shiman Linglan's disciple, Mochi. Mochi taught him the time resurrection technique, and he gave Mochi the time cycle technique. However, his time cycle was in the form of a circle, forming a time loop, so that the head and the tail were connected. If this was one of the 6 divine techniques of time, how could Mochi not know it in the past? What's the difference? Therefore, the answer was the time cage that appeared at the beginning. Although the cage was gone, the invisible time barrier was still there. This time barrier could block his battle with the ancient demon ape, which meant that this time barrier was not set up by Yuan Kong at all. The person who set up the cage should be at least at the god-slaying level, or even the sea-quelling god level. In other words, in addition to Yuan Kong, there was someone else here. That person was powerful and helped Yuan Kong set up this killing trap. If this was the time cycle he created, it didn't seem difficult to crack it. Since the time cycle was a cycle, there must be a cycle direction. As long as he reversed this direction, he could break this technique. After all, this place was only so big, so it wasn't difficult to find the law of circulation. However, when Han Fei felt the flow of the law of time, he discovered that the person who set up this trap didn't use a timeline as a cycle, but a section of the time river as a cycle. This was a strengthened version of the time cycle he created. However, with his current strength as a sea-quelling god, it wasn't difficult for him to break it. When Han Fei forcibly controlled the reversal of the time river, the ancient demon ape disappeared with a bang. Yuan Kong reappeared after this time cycle. This time, it was clearly his true body. Han Fei asked, "The technique I created?" Yuan Kong shook his head. "The time temple has existed for a long time. We've all created the techniques you can create. This is just a kind of time manipulation technique. The time temple's time manipulation technique contains the time cycle. Although this technique is not weak, it's not comparable to the 6 divine techniques. I used this technique on you because I wanted you to realize the power of the technique you comprehended. After all, you are actually very talented, but you don't seem to care. If you hadn't had the strength of the sea-quelling god, I'm afraid you might not even have been able to break the technique you created." Han Fei frowned. What Yuan Kong said did make sense. He had indeed broken it with his strength. But if he was still in the great monarch realm, it would probably be difficult. Han Fei asked, "So, Are you showing me the power of the time temple? Yuan Kong chuckled. I want to tell you that don't underestimate the divine techniques of our time temple, just because you can unleash the strength of a sea-quelling god. If you can't even pass me, not only will you not be able to save Shiman Linglan, but you will even cut off her path to becoming a peerless cultivator. This is not an alarmist. Han Fei nodded slightly. Please. Yuan Kong also said solemnly, what I'm going to show next is the 6 divine techniques of time infinity. When Yuan Kong attacked, Han Fei didn't. At least, before he finished reading the 6 divine techniques of time, he wouldn't take the initiative to deal with Yuan Kong. When the surrounding space was illusory, Han Fei clearly felt that the timeline had been displaced, and he was no longer in the normal time. Even the time barrier in front of Han Fei had disappeared, including Yuan Kong. Time predicament? It was true that this was still the river of eternal darkness, but he was the only one left. He didn't know what the so-called time predicament meant. But Han Fei knew that since it was not in the normal timeline, he had to cross the current timeline, or he wouldn't be able to return. The timeline was nothing more than before and after. With the normal timeline as the baseline, it was impossible for Yuan Kong to pass through the future timeline, so it could only be the previous timeline. Therefore, he just needed to follow the direction of the time river and break the timeline. However, Han Fei kept crossing one timeline after another and didn't stop until he couldn't cut open a new timeline. But at this moment, Han Fei already knew that something was wrong. Logically speaking, he had returned to normal time, but the time barrier had disappeared, and Yuan Kong was not here. Swish! 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 In the next moment, Han Fei saw a large number of skeleton soldiers rushing at him from outside his perception. Huh? The airwaves around Han Fei shook, and all the skeleton soldiers were shattered. However, after only a few seconds, tens of thousands, or even 100,000 skeleton soldiers surged over. Where did so many come from? Han Fei had walked in the river of eternal darkness for 7 years, so he had some understanding of the river of eternal darkness. Even if he encountered the undead of fear, he would only encounter them once in a while. How could there be so many of them? After 100 seconds, Han Fei found that in addition to the skeleton soldiers, there were only some limbs, dark masks, and so on, and they showed no signs of stopping. If that was the case, there was no need for him to maintain the combat power of the sea-quelling god level. As long as he had normal combat power, he could still crush them. At least, he hadn't found a way to crack this time predicament yet. He could only fight while looking for a way to crack this time predicament. Since it's a time divine technique, there must be remnants of the law of time, right? If that was the case, there was no need for the strong masters of the myriad races to guard the ominous battlefield. One strong master from the time temple would be enough. Han Fei cut open the timeline again and shuttled through it. However, no matter how he shuttled, there was always a large number of fear undead surging at him. Impossible. Is there a problem with so many timelines? This time, Han Fei stepped directly into the time river. When he entered the time river, he discovered that the time river here had turned into a time vortex. No. There can't be a problem with the time river itself. If there is a problem, it can only be fake. Fuse. Han Fei finally reacted and immediately fused with little black and little white. The yin-yang divine eyes could see through illusions, and little black. And little white's bloodline level was extremely high. And Yuan Kong was only a great monarch. Without the help of a strong master, with his strength, no matter how strong he was, it was impossible for him to trap him. In the normal timeline, Shiman Linglan looked puzzled. Although Yuan Kong is very strong, his soul power is not strong enough. Otherwise, if teacher took action with the multiple times of time and time illusions, even if they couldn't trap him to death, it would be enough to trap him for a long time. But teacher, you are here but didn't take action. Are you teaching him the 6 divine time techniques? The beautiful woman said indifferently, silly child, otherwise, how can he pass our Lord's time-killing array alone? Of course, whether he can comprehend it or not is another matter. Illusion? Han Fei was shocked. The complicated timeline was superimposed with illusions. But this kind of illusion was not a fake illusion, but based on reality. It trapped a massive number of fearful undead into this time illusion, combining reality and illusion, making it impossible to tell if it was real or fake. If it weren't for the strong masters who had mastered the great Tao of time, they might not have realized that all of this was fake. Interesting. Han Fei seemed to realize something. He cut through timelines one after another until he finished all the timelines, and a smile gradually appeared on his lips. All of them were fake. Every timeline was a kind of time illusion. But in this environment, 3 things were real. One was time itself, one was the fear undead, and the other was the time vortex. Suddenly, Han Fei gave up searching in the timeline. He seemed to have figured it out. Han Fei sat cross-legged in the time vortex. In all the fake timelines, what really drove these illusions was this vortex. Besides, only in the time vortex would he not be affected by the fearful undead. In the time vortex, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. After only 3 years, Han Fei suddenly opened his eyes and smiled. As expected of the 6 divine techniques of time. It's indeed exquisite. Han Fei suddenly stepped out of the time vortex and stepped into the timelines. Again, stopping for a period of time in each timeline. Han Fei didn't stop until several days later. He shouted in a low voice. Sword 5, shattering. This sword was completely made of the law of time, cutting through all the timelines in a row. At that moment, Han Fei's figure appeared in every timeline. All Han Fei tore open the time river at the same time and slashed at the time vortex. Boom! At this moment, all the timelines collapsed, and the terrifying undead wandering in the timelines all disappeared. The first time barrier finally appeared in front of Han Fei. Huff! Han Fei was slightly relieved. In front of him, the law of time intertwined, forming Yuan Kong. Blood oozed from the corner of the latter's mouth, and his breath was unstable. He had clearly been seriously injured. 3 years. Yuan Kong took a deep look at Han Fei. In 3 years, you've comprehended 2 divine techniques. But I'm curious. How did you find me? The corners of Han Fei's mouth curled up slightly. Actually, I discovered you a long time ago, because of your vitality. Although you hid it very well, you don't know the law of life. Fear undead is lifeless, and time itself isn't fused with the long river of life. However, there is vitality in the time vortex. If that vitality isn't mine, it can only be yours. Han Fei continued, you showed me the time indestructibility technique, which means that in time, you are indestructible. Therefore, you turned into time itself and formed a vortex in the real-time river with your own time law. You also showed me the time division technique, which means that you can mobilize your own power in multiple timelines. Of course, you need time and resources to set up a trap like this. You also showed me the time cycle. Only the cycle method can create so many terrifying undead creatures. Therefore, this so-called time predicament is a hybrid divine technique built from the time indestructibility technique, the time division technique, and the time cycle. Yuan Kong couldn't help but cover his head and laugh. You're very smart. However, this also shows that I taught you well. However, in the past 3 years, my soul has almost been in a state of loss. What did you do to me? Han Fei smiled casually. Oh. Nothing. Didn't you say that I comprehended 2 divine techniques in 3 years? In fact, I comprehended more than 2. Han Fei raised his hand, and the law of time intertwined in his palm and finally turned into a ball. Then, Han Fei tore open the time river and guided a large amount of the law of time into the ball. In the end, the ball turned into a crystal glass. Time stacking technique? Yuan Kong's pupils were constricted. I remember I didn't teach you the time stacking technique. Han Fei smiled. Don't be hasty. Behind Han Fei, the void cracked, and the time river appeared. Swish. 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 From the time river, countless time chains spread out. The chains appeared and spread in all directions, grabbing the void, forming a time barrier. Yuan Kong's pupils were constricted. Time sealing skylock? Is it your stealing technique? Han Fei nodded slightly. Sorry, I'm actually not very perceptive. My comprehension time is too slow. I can't afford to wait. If I comprehend it for 1,800 years, will Ling Lan have to wait for 1,800 years? Han Fei knew from the beginning that the 6 divine techniques of time were very strong and difficult to master. His great Tao of time was probably still those that he learned when he was young. Later, he met Mo Chi and learned a little from her. Later, he absorbed some from the river when he was at the immortal level. In short, except for inventing a time cycle that others had already invented, Han Fei had never seriously studied the great Tao of time. Therefore, his understanding of time might be on a completely different level from Yuan Kong. Therefore, it was not impossible to directly comprehend the 6 divine techniques of time, but there were too many foundations to build. How could Han Fei have the time? Therefore, in the past 3 years, he had been stealing and crazily absorbing Yuan Kong's understanding of the great Tao of time and the law of time. Han Fei didn't dare to say that he had completely caught up with Yuan Kong, but he had at least learned 70 or 80% of it. His understanding of the law of time was completely different from before. Therefore, in his crazy stealing, he had learned all the 6 divine techniques of time. Han Fei couldn't help but exclaim. The 6 divine techniques of time were indeed worthy of being the exclusive technique of the Time Temple. Among them, the time resurrection technique could revive ancient creatures and assist in combat. The time indestructibility technique could be said to be a kind of immortality technique. Unless one instantly crushed the user or severed his connection with the time river, it was impossible to kill him. The time-splitting technique was indeed as Yuan Kong said. It was not as simple as he had seen. In addition to being able to mobilize his power in different timelines. It could also cut enemies with different time powers and kill them in different times. It was the only super powerful offensive divine technique of the 6 divine techniques of time. The time predicament was a little similar to dreams in dreams. It could make people fall into time illusions without knowing it. This was because every illusion was built on reality. It was a killing technique and a hybrid divine technique of the 6 time divine techniques that could fuse various other divine techniques. The time stacking technique was an auxiliary divine technique that accelerated or decelerated time, but it also had offensive power. It was almost a sure kill technique for those below the immortal level. After all, no one below the immortal level could resist the erosion of time. The time sealing lock, which was the time chains that filled the sky, extended from the time river. It was a chain seal completely made of the law of time. It could seal the realm and form a wall of time. The time river would continuously provide power. In addition, this technique could cut off the time in a domain. It was a pure defensive divine technique. In Han Fei's opinion, the 6 divine techniques of time were both offensive and defensive. It also fused an immortality technique and the 1,000 opportunities killing technique. If he could master it, it would be almost a perfect combination of divine techniques. Of course, although the description was a little exaggerated, it was not difficult to learn the 6 divine techniques of time. However, to learn this technique, one had to master the great Tao of time and the law of time. This alone was 1 in a million. Therefore, the threshold of the 6 divine techniques of time was very high. If the cultivation difficulty was also so high, perhaps only 1 in a trillion could practice it. But if it was really that case, the time temple wouldn't have many strong masters, so it couldn't become one of the 3 temples that shocked the sea of stars. Yuan Kong's face changed several times, and then he cupped his hands at Han Fei. As expected of the human emperor. Good move. However, this level is only the first level of the trial. Oh? Han Fei's heart skipped a beat. It would be ridiculous if this trial was divided into several levels. After all, the Master of Time secretly taught him the 6 divine techniques of time because he had a request. If the difficulty was too high, what could he ask for? Yuan Kong looked back at the time barrier and slowly said, "This is a time barrier personally set up by our master. Even if it's casually set up, the danger inside is indescribable. Human Emperor, take care." Han Fei looked at the time barrier in front of him, and inside the barrier, Shiman Linglan's heart began to thump. Although she didn't know why her master and the 3rd temple master dared to teach Han Fei the 6 divine time techniques, since they had taught him, they probably wouldn't let Han Fei die. However, she never expected that in just 3 years, Han Fei had mastered the 6 divine techniques of time. This cultivation speed was unbelievable. Sure enough, he was still the same as before, a peerless heavenly talent. And it took her 30,000 years to master the 6 divine techniques of time, from the basics to the myriad time control techniques. Beside Shiman Linglan, the beautiful woman said indifferently, "Linglan, your strength is already at the peak of the great monarch realm. It's time for you to walk the rest of your path on your own. However, this path may be very difficult. I only remind you that no matter what, don't forget your own path. No matter how strong the myriad Daos in the world are, they are not as strong as your own Dao. Remember it. Master." Swish. The beautiful woman didn't intend to get involved in the meeting between Han Fei and Shiman Linglan, so she left first. Outside the time barrier, Yuan Kong's warning was still ringing in his ears. But Han Fei had already pressed a hand on the time barrier. With Han Fei's current comprehension of time, his body only trembled slightly. And he adjusted the power of time to the same frequency as this barrier. In the next moment, he disappeared into it. Buzz. The scene in front of Han Fei changed, and he fell in front of the white bone tombstone. When he saw that Shiman Linglan's body was imprisoned by the time chains and was about to decay, his eyes immediately turned red. That glance made Han Fei furious. Linglan. Han Fei's first reaction was to go to Shiman Linglan and heal her. However, Han Fei took a step forward and found that he was still where he was. Han Fei looked anxious and was about to unleash the power of the sea quelling God level, but at this moment, Shiman Linglan just raised her head slightly, glanced at him, and said calmly, "What are you doing here? I told you that. There is no longer any relationship between us." Han Fei looked pained. Although he was furious, he tried his best to be gentle. "Now is not the time to be angry. Let me save you out now." Buzz. In the next moment, Han Fei activated his original Great Tao and immediately pushed his strength to the level of sea quelling God. At this moment, with his sharp perception, he found that he was controlled by countless time threads. Bang! With Han Fei as the center, the power of the time law exploded and shattered the time threads. However, in the next moment, a time tide with unparalleled power whistled over like a starry sky and instantly swept him in. The scene in front of Han Fei changed. Shiman Linglan disappeared, and he fell into a time predicament again. And in this time predicament, the world collapsed, and the supreme power pressed down on Han Fei until he couldn't breathe. At the same time, billions of time blades slashed at him. Han Fei knew that this was a barrier set up by the Master of Time. It was definitely not something Yuan Kong's traps could compare to. Even if he had mastered the 6 divine techniques of time, it was impossible for him to break it as easily as just now. Therefore, Han Fei took out the blade of hope and roared, "Kill!" Swish, swish. The double knives were peerless and shattered layers of the void. Even the trapping and killing array set up by a Dominator-level powerhouse was instantly cut apart like paper. This was not a matter of strength, but the unique ability of the blade of hope. At this moment, Han Fei didn't hesitate to show the blade of hope. He was very angry and didn't want to waste time with the people from the Time Temple. Han Fei was confident that no matter what kind of killing techniques the Time Master set up, they were meaningless in front of the blade of hope. But as soon as Han Fei returned, he saw that the law of time intertwined into the image of a man in a golden robe. Master of Time? Although he didn't expect the Master of Time to come in person, when he saw him, Han Fei's eyes turned red. He held the blade of hope in his hand that then fused together, and slashed out with all his strength. Then, he roared, "Come at me if you have the guts. Why do you just make things difficult for a woman?" At this moment, Han Fei didn't care who the person opposite him was. Even if the ominous came in person, he still dared to slash out. Clank. But even the combat power of a sea-quelling god was nothing in front of a dignified Dominator. The terrifying broadsword beam that could cut the starry river seemed to have crossed the barrier of time but completely dissipated 5 feet in front of the Master of Time. Han Fei didn't stop. He knew that this blow couldn't shake the Master of Time. So in the next moment, his body turned into tens of thousands of lightning marks, which instantly attacked along the traces left by the blade of hope. This time, he used the blood sky blade to erupt with double fighting intent. And even fed his essence blood to the blood sky blade to double his combat power again. He had really used all his strength. Clank. But even so, the Master of Time held the blood sky blade in one hand and slapped him. Han Fei flew backward with a bang and instantly hit the time barrier. His body was full of cracks, and he seemed to have been fished out of blood. Explode. Boom. Even in such a situation, Han Fei didn't stop. After launching the strongest blow, he secretly left the infinity water behind. Although he knew that the infinity water couldn't shake the Time Master, as long as it could touch him. It showed his attitude. However, the moment the infinity water exploded, it was as if a bubble was erected here. All the explosive power was locked in the time bubble, unable to dissipate at all. Puff. The Master of Time reached out and gently touched it, and the time bubble shattered with a bang, but no power escaped. The Master of Time only glanced at Han Fei, and Han Fei felt that infinite pressure was pressing on his shoulder, trying to make him surrender. All of this happened too quickly. Shiman Linglan only saw 2 knife lights, but Han Fei was already dripping with blood. Suppressed by the power of time, he wasn't even qualified to get up. Shiman Linglan couldn't care less. She didn't expect the Time Master to come at all. How could a barrier set up by the Time Master be the same? Kakik. Han Fei spread his legs and put his hands on his knees. He raised his head and glared at the Time Master with a creepy smile. Master of Time, since you don't dare to kill me, get lost. Otherwise, when I suppress all the powers under the heavens, I'll destroy your time temple. Humph. The Master of Time snorted, looking dignified. How do you know that I don't dare to kill you? Han Fei grinned coldly. Then have a try. The Master of Time snorted. As you wish. Buzz. Around Han Fei, time was flowing backward, and billions of layers of distance seemed to be crushing him from different times. Han Fei knew that this was the time-splitting technique, one of the 6 divine techniques of time, but he couldn't shake it, nor could he beat the Master of Time. Crack. Crack. In the next moment, Han Fei felt that the bones in his body were broken, and his body was full of cracks. Even the law of life couldn't make up for this injury. Blood Sky Blade. Han Fei roared and the blood sky blade returned, supporting him so that he wouldn't fall. Even if his body was shattered, Han Fei couldn't kneel in front of the Master of Time. Ka ka ka. Every part of Han Fei's body exploded, and his flesh and blood filled this place. In the blink of an eye, he looked even more miserable than Shiman Linglan. Even the Dao patterns on his Dao bones were disintegrating. Shiman Linglan couldn't care less. She dragged the time chain and shouted, Master Dominator, please let him go. Everything happened because of me. It has nothing to do with him. Seeing that the Master of Time was ignoring Shiman Linglan and Han Fei's body was still shattering, Shiman Linglan immediately shouted, Master Dominator. Linglan is willing to exchange a life for a life. Please let her go. Shiman Linglan knew what she had and what the Time Temple saw in her. She was suppressed and couldn't use her own power, but she still had the power of that void. She knew that this void power couldn't stop the Time Master, but she could kill herself with it. If she killed herself with the void, even the master of time might not be able to revive her. Therefore, if she was really so important, the master of time shouldn't be indifferent. However, just as Shimin Linglan activated the power of the void, her body seemed to freeze, and the power of the void fell silent into her body again. The Time Master said majestically, "How can I let you mess around in front of me?" Shimin Linglan couldn't move at all, and tears flowed from the corners of her eyes. "Master Dominator, as long as you let him go, I can become a god and enter the chaotic era. Isn't this what our time temple has been pursuing?" Shimin Linglan was begging, which made Han Fei even angrier. Of course, he knew that Shimin Linglan was compromising for him. Therefore, when Shimin Linglan said that she had nothing to do with him just now, she was just angry. Han Fei shouted, "Linglan, don't beg him. He doesn't dare to kill me. As long as the ominous doesn't disappear, the time temple will have to be destroyed. If he really doesn't care, the time temple's defense for billions of years will be meaningless. Time, if you have the guts, put down your pride. Let's fight one-on-one in the same realm. I bet you won't be a match for me." The Time Master looked at Han Fei indifferently. "Do you really think you have the power to defeat the ominous? You don't even know the path behind the supreme divine technique. How can you? Ha ha ha. The demon purification pot is in my hands, the path of reincarnation is on me, and I'm born with dual spiritual heritages. You have no choice." Humph. The Master of Time waved his hand gently, and the suppressing pressure around Han Fei disappeared. Time intertwined around Han Fei. His mangled body returned to normal in the blink of an eye. The power of the time immortal technique was even better than the law of life in the time river. However, the Master of Time didn't let Han Fei go. He waved his hand and 18 soul devouring all shot into Han Fei's body. Roar. In an instant, Han Fei felt that his soul seemed to be collapsing, his body seemed to be disintegrating, his strength was almost completely sealed, and his body and soul were enduring the most indescribable pain in history. In front of Han Fei, a path constructed by the law of time appeared. The Master of Time said in a dignified voice, "It's not my responsibility to enter the chaotic era, but your responsibility. It's up to you whether you go or not. However, only by unforgettably experiencing how hard to obtain it will you know how precious it is. If you can cross this 1,000-kilometer distance with a mortal body, I'll pardon Shimin Linglan. If you can't, it's your own fate. You can't blame others." After that, the Master of Time looked at Shimin Linglan. "That void can't shake my power yet. Let him walk this path on his own. If he can't even pass this path, it proves that he is not someone I should choose." Swish. With that, the figure of the Time Master faded away. As Han Fei expected, the Master of Time had no intention of killing him, but Han Fei didn't expect to be nailed down by these 18 soul-devouring alls. On this point, Han Fei felt that there was no problem with the Master of Time. If Shimin Linglan died, it would definitely become Han Fei's greatest knot. Roar. Han Fei roared in pain, "Don't do stupid things. Wait for me." At this moment, Shimin Linglan was already in tears. Although she was frozen at this moment, she could still speak. She shouted in a low voice, "Use the void. Mark. Don't try to come over." Humph. Blue veins bulged all over Han Fei's body as he tried to prop himself up. What he said is right. Only by unforgettably experiencing how hard to Obtain it, can I know, how precious it is. Roar. Han Fei tried to take a step forward, only to fall. Ah. Idiot, I told you to use the void mark. I order you to use the void mark. However, Han Fei raised his head with difficulty and smiled at Shimin Linglan. Roar. Han Fei roared, even the world can't suppress me. How can a mere road stop me? Han Fei staggered, trembled, and got up again. This time, Han Fei walked 7 or 8 steps in a row before he fell to the ground. Idiot, moron, fool. Since you're here to save me, listen to me. However, Han Fei still just smiled at her, got up, and continued forward. Idiot Wang Han, don't you even listen to me? If you want me to forgive you, do as I say. Idiot, I beg you. Don't go anymore. Han Fei, if you don't listen to me, even if you crawl to me, I won't forgive you again. Never. Ha ha ha. Be asterisk starred, be asterisk starred, be asterisk starred. Han Fei was so stubborn that Shimin Linglan wanted to stomp her feet, but she couldn't move at all. She could only watch Han Fei do whatever he wanted. 1 day. 2 days. 7 days. Half a month. On the 27th day, Han Fei finally arrived, but many parts of his body had decayed. Originally, although this road was only thousands of kilometers long and could be covered in 8 days normally, Han Fei had already staggered for 27 days. At this moment, he was only 100 meters away from Shimin Linglan. For some reason, Shimin Linglan's tears couldn't stop flowing. She was sobbing uncontrollably and no longer cared about her image. Both she and Han Fei had already lost their image. Han Fei gritted his teeth and walked forward step by step, leaving his blood as a mark along the way. Finally, when Han Fei stood in front of Shimin Linglan, the soul devouring alls on his body gradually turned incorporeal and finally turned into the law of time, dissipating on the spot. Time Temple. In the Time Temple, the Master of Time sat on the throne and sighed slightly. In the end, I can't activate his supreme divine technique. This path is difficult. As for Shimin Linglan's master, the beautiful woman also heaved a long sigh. Perhaps the subsequent path of the supreme divine technique has nothing to do with potential. After all, this divine technique is too ancient. In the long river of history, perhaps only the first-generation creatures of the chaotic era can understand its true meaning. River of eternal darkness. Half a meter in front of Han Fei, Shimin Linglan, the 7th temple master of the Time Temple and a peak-level great monarch, was crying like rain. Han Fei had completely forgotten his injuries. A gentle smile appeared on his face, and he said gently in a low voice, "You used to ask me to wander with me. And I did. Now, come home with me." Boo-hoo. Shimin Linglan burst into tears. At this moment, she could no longer be determined, could no longer hide the feelings in her heart, and began to cry like a child. Han Fei gently pulled Shimin Linglan into his arms. His original great Tao was operating, and his strength had been raised to the level of sea-quelling God. In his palm, the law of time gathered, and the 6 soul devouring alls in Shimin Linglan's body were gradually disassembled by the law of time. Bam! 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 The 5-time ceiling sky locks that locked Shimin Linglan also broke at this moment. Sorry to keep you waiting. Shimin Linglan, who had regained her freedom, immediately hugged Han Fei tightly. This long-lost temperature almost made him lost. Ah! Shimin Linglan opened her mouth and bit Han Fei's shoulder. However, Han Fei didn't react at all. Idiot, Wang Han. When Shimin Linglan came back to her senses, she found that Han Fei had already fallen into a deep sleep, having completely forgotten the pain of the eternal darkness tide. Shimin Linglan immediately loosened her mouth, helped Han Fei sit down, and let him sleep in her arms. At this moment, she didn't make a sound but looked down at Han Fei with complicated emotions in her eyes, and the corners of her mouth subconsciously curled up slightly. As she watched, tears appeared in her eyes again. Why are you crying again? Han Fei's eyes were still closed, but he gently raised his hand and wiped the corner of Shimin Linglan's eyes. You didn't sleep? Shimin Linglan pretended to get up, but she suddenly found that Han Fei had become extremely heavy. She couldn't get up. Han Fei opened his eyes and chuckled. I don't know when it started, but I don't even feel tired anymore. However, I know that you must be very tired. Shimin Linglan took Han Fei's hand away, and her face turned cold. I'm not tired. Han Fei knew that women had to be pacified. Han Fei reached out to touch Shimin Linglan's cheek, and the latter leaned back slightly and deliberately avoided it. Han Fei couldn't help but smile. He waved his hand, and a time tide surrounded the two of them, forming a time cocoon. The time divine chains intertwined in all directions, sealing this place. Linglan? Shimin Linglan turned her head away. Han Fei put away the smile on his face, straightened up slightly, and looked at Shimin Linglan. Linglan, from now on, as long as you want, I will never leave you alone, never again. Shimin Linglan's eyelids twitched slightly, and her heart began to beat quickly, but she still said stubbornly, I don't want. You don't? Han Fei suddenly turned over and pressed Shimin Linglan under him. The two couldn't help but look at each other. Han Fei said, if you don't want to, I'll snatch you back and make you my wife. Shimin Linglan looked straight at Han Fei. If I'm your wife, how about Xia Xiaochan? I'm afraid Xia Xiaochan will have a problem with me. Oh, although I'm suppressed here, I'm not ignorant of the outside world. I heard that you gave birth to an extremely talented daughter, Han Chani, right? Han Fei. Han Fei looked a little embarrassed, but then he said shamelessly, I don't care. I can't go against my deepest desire. Both you and Xia Xiaochan are the most important women in my life. You know, I carry the hope of too many people. They hope that I can fight my way out and fight alongside them to repel the ominous. In fact, I don't care at all. What does the rise and fall of all races have to do with me? However, I'm willing to fight to the end of the Sea of Stars for you. Even if the Sea of Stars is destined to be destroyed, I'll take you to fight for a chance of survival in this destruction. Humph. Shimin Linglan turned her head away. Since the human race appeared in the sea realm, she had already known about Han Fei's past. She knew everything Han Fei did in the raging sea, even in the Yin-Yang world. Strictly speaking, she was the one who entered Han Fei's life later. Although she hoped that Han Fei belonged to her alone, she knew that she couldn't be so selfish. After all, she had already known Xia Xiaochan's existence when they were in the Grand Myriad Mountains. Suddenly, Shimin Linglan felt that something was wrong. The rotten but not completely rotten battle suit on her body was decaying at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, nearly half of it had dissipated. Not only was Her battle suit rapidly decaying, but Han Fei's own battle suit was also decaying. Shimin Linglan felt Han Fei's fingers brushing past her palm, her wrist, and her fair and tender arm brushing past her shoulder. Plop, plop. Shimin Linglan couldn't help but tense up. Although they ate and slept together when they were young, they didn't take the last step. At this moment, the touch of their skin seemed to ignite the feelings that had transcended 100,000 years. In the blue intertwined time law, their lips and teeth touched, as natural as ripples in the ocean, as gentle as water and milk. Blending. The long time river separated the two of them. But at this moment, it witnessed them sleeping and making out together. One day later, the faint blue time cocoon finally slowly dissipated. Han Fei hugged Shimin Linglan and leaned against the white bone tombstone, enjoying the temporary warmth. Crack. However, at that moment, in the river of eternal darkness, boundless tribulation clouds gathered. With the white bone tombstone as the center, they radiated out for millions of kilometers and suddenly became transparent. As if affected by the rules of the tribulation clouds, they became visible. Shimin Linglan looked up at the heavenly tribulation and smiled as if she was confident. She said, "Shall I transcend the tribulation first?" However, Han Fei didn't let go. Millions of refined stars and hundreds of spirits of plants and trees appeared in front of the two of them. Shimin Linglan was stunned at first, then a smile appeared on her face. "I have resources." Han Fei, "Keep them then." Shimin Linglan laughed. "Are these spirits of plants and trees? One is enough. How can I use 100? Han Fei said, "If I say you can use it, you can. My wife has the potential to become a dominator. These resources are not even enough for you." Then, Han Fei shook his wrist and the blade of hope appeared. Han Fei said leisurely, "Hope is indelible." A trace of mist flashed in Shimin Linglan's eyes. She turned her head and kissed Han Fei's cheek like a dragonfly pecking water. In the next moment, Shimin Linglan stepped on the air and stepped up. In an instant, her gentleness was gone, and her valiant bearing appeared. She curled the corners of her mouth into a smile. This was Shimin Linglan's true appearance. It was as if the captain of the Avenger pirates was standing on the deck, facing the fierce wind, slashing forward bravely. Han Fei didn't get up. Instead, with a thought, he moved horizontally with the white bone tombstone under him. A wine calabash appeared in his hand at some point in time, and green wine poured out of the wine calabash. Gulp. Ah! As expected of the best wine in the world. Rumble. Rumble. After a while, the divine tribulation rumbled down. The power of the spirit of plants and trees roared like a tide and entered Shimin Linglan's body. A million refined stars contained endless energy. When Shimin Linglan passed 8 divine tribulations in a row, thousands of level 7 energy crystals and hundreds of level 8 energy crystals appeared beside Han Fei and were projected into Shimin Linglan's divine tribulation. Shimin Linglan glanced at Han Fei sideways with a smile on her lips. She turned around and flew up to the sky. The blade of hope bloomed with brilliance, slashing out a law of hope unique to Shimin Linglan. Crack. The power of the divine tribulation was overwhelming, but it couldn't resist that faint brilliance. Shimin Linglan was fearless. Han Fei's return gave her the courage to fight this world, even if there were difficulties and dangers. In front of her, she wasn't afraid. Buzz. The faint law of hope gathered crazily, suddenly illuminating the entire area. Enveloped by the divine tribulation. At that moment, Han Fei could clearly see that a divine persona was broken. This meant that at this moment, Shimin Linglan was already between a god and a Godslayer. In the next moment, Han Fei saw the sky collapsing. This was completely different from Senior Brother Azure Dragon's god-slaying tribulation. What Shimin Linglan faced was the collapse of the world and the withering of all things. Even Han Fei subconsciously sat up straight. Shimin Linglan shouted, "My heart already belongs to someone. Even if the world collapses, what's there to be afraid of? Kill." As the law of hope split the sky collapsing scene instantly disappeared. Han Fei smiled. God-slaying level. Everyone had their own persistence. When this persistence was so strong that even gods couldn't tempt it, it was the god-slaying level. However, Shimin Linglan clearly didn't stop. With bangs, the energy crystals around her shattered one after another. The massive amount of power of the divine source was swallowed by Shimin Linglan in the blink of an eye. The 100 spirits of plants and trees all turned incorporeal and were also absorbed by Shimin Linglan. Shimin Linglan ascended to the sky. Just as the god-slaying tribulation ended, she stepped into it. Unfortunately, Han Fei couldn't see this scene. However, this scene was very similar to the scene when Senior Brother Azure Dragon entered the Divine Sea. Senior Brother Azure Dragon swallowed the tribulation clouds and didn't let them leave. He didn't know what Shimin Linglan's tribulation was. After about half an hour, the surging heavenly tribulation suddenly began to dissipate, and the eternal dark tide came again. Han Fei's perception range began to shrink in order. At that moment, Shimin Linglan appeared in his vision, but there were still tears on her face, and she looked a little tired. The moment she saw Han Fei, she plunged into Han Fei's arms. "I knew you wouldn't leave me." Hearing this, although Han Fei didn't know what Shimin Linglan's sequeling God tribulation was, it couldn't be easy. He said softly, "Of course I won't leave. Even if you drive me away, I won't leave you alone." After a while, Shimin Linglan finally calmed down, and Han Fei asked, "What did you encounter in your last tribulation?" Shimin Linglan still held Han Fei's arm tightly and then cast an aggrieved look at Han Fei. "You? Me?" Han Fei was stunned. "I can even become a sea-quelling god tribulation?" Han Fei asked, "What did I do?" Shimin Linglan pursed her lips and didn't speak. Instead, she changed the topic. The sea-quelling god doesn't transcend a tribulation, but his heart. Remember this. Not transcend a tribulation, but his heart. Han Fei murmured, only to find that the surrounding time laws were intertwined. Again. Han Fei was puzzled. What's wrong? Is someone eavesdropping? However, a blush appeared on Shimin Linglan's face. Yes. 3 days later. The time cocoon dispersed, and Shimin Linglan held Han Fei's hand with a sweet expression, completely losing the valiant demeanor of the female war god. Shimin Linglan said, "Although theoretically speaking, we can go against the current, no one can be sure if you can enter that era. Therefore, when the time comes, I'll enter that era first." Han Fei shook his head. "If you want to enter, let's enter together." "I said I wouldn't let you go alone." Shimin Linglan said, "But what if you're not allowed to enter that era?" Han Fei said, "Can that era kill me? I'm undead. The great Tao laws of that era can't destroy me easily." Shimin Linglan asked, "What if you really can't enter?" Han Fei smiled. Then let's go home. It's just a guess of the time temple that we can find the way to kill the ominous from the chaotic era. I don't believe that there's only one way in this world to kill the ominous. Hearing Han Fei's words, Shiman Linglan couldn't help but put on a sweet and blissful smile. Okay, if you can't enter, we'll go home. Swish, swish. The long time river spanned billions of years. With the protection of the law of life, Han Fei and Shiman Linglan crossed it all the way. At this moment, the two of them had already crossed to the primordial era. Through the time river, Han Fei saw the boundless primordial land and the current sea of stars. In that primordial world, all races were fighting for supremacy. In the sea of stars, there were peerless rocks swimming in the starry sky and fighting the sea of stars giant beasts. There were also strong masters competing for supremacy, shattering the starry sky and shaking the star core. Every time they crossed an era, the efficiency of the reverse flow became harder. In front of them was an era of rapid change. Even if there were occasionally strong masters looking at the time river, they disappeared in the blink of an eye in the eyes of Han Fei and Shiman Linglan. The scene in their eyes was like a white horse passing through a gap. Endless images flashed in front of their eyes until they came to the time barrier of the chaotic era. Shiman Linglan, we're here. Buzz. Han Fei immediately activated his original Great Tao and pushed his strength to the level of sea-quelling god. In the next moment, the two of them rushed into a time storm. The time ceiling Skylock locked the two of them tightly to ensure that they wouldn't be separated. In the storm, Han Fei activated the law of life with all his strength. Finally, after they crossed more than 300,000 years of time, the storm gradually subsided, and what Han Fei and Shiman Linglan saw was a desolate sea realm, a lonely sea of stars. In this era, the sea of stars was filled with a massive number of purple nebulas. Primordial mist. Han Fei looked at the purple nebula and recognized that it was the primordial mist. He had just felt it not long ago. In addition to the purple nebula, Han Fei and Shiman Linglan also saw some extremely ancient and powerful existences in the sea of stars. For example, there were ancient trees rooted in the vast starry sky, with stars hanging on their branches. There were giant beasts with huge bodies and mouths that swallowed stars. There were plants that enveloped billions of kilometers of the starry river. Han Fei even saw that the sea of stars was burning, the fire curtain was burning the sky, and a sword was floating in it. It was very magical. Is that the primordial star tree? No, it's different. Shiman Linglan said, that sword seems to have appeared in history. It's called the Creation Fire God Sword. It's a supreme nature treasure, but it was broken at the end of the primordial era. I don't know how it was broken, but it seems to be related to the pouring of the chaotic fire domain. Han Fei couldn't help but sigh. As expected of the chaotic era, all kinds of divine treasures can be seen everywhere. Shiman Linglan asked, since we're already here, when should we go in? The vast ocean navigator appeared in Han Fei's hand, and Han Fei shouted, before the first ominous return. Among the 3 ominous returns in history, only the first one was the weakest. The Emperor Sparrow once said that at that time, his father, who was the leader of the primordial strange beasts, could defeat the ominous. In the primordial era, not to mention winning, even if the 6 ancient lineages joined forces, they wouldn't be a match. Therefore, if they wanted to explore a way to defeat the ominous, they had to wait until the first ominous battle broke out. As the streams of light shuttled, with Han Fei and Shimin Linglan's current strength, it could be said that they had jumped for 1,000 years. Finally, at a certain time node, the vast ocean navigator suddenly moved. Han Fei roared, "This is it." Swish. Shimin Linglan looked at Han Fei and grabbed Han Fei's arm tightly. Han Fei grinned and said, "If you can't enter, go home and find another way." Shimin Linglan nodded heavily. As she waved her hand, the blade of hope cut open the time river and touched the chaotic era. Buzz. When the two of them stepped in through the gap in the time river, Han Fei felt dizzy, as if something had been extracted from him. Swish, swish. In the next moment, when Han Fei came back to his senses, he heard Shimin Linglan's nervous cry, "Idiot, what's wrong? Is there something wrong?" Han Fei covered his head with one hand and slowly opened his eyes. In front of him was a shattered sea of stars, which looked like the shattered star sea. Han Fei's eyes glittered. "I'm fine. Have we entered?" Shimin Linglan also looked incredulous. "Yes, we're in. This is the chaotic era." Han Fei couldn't help but feel excited. This was a real ancient age. He immediately wanted to take out the vast ocean navigator to guide him. However, this time, Han Fei's expression became solemn. Seeing this, Shimin Linglan couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong?" Han Fei said solemnly, "The vast ocean navigator has disappeared." Disappeared? Han Fei shook his head. "I don't know. Besides, it's not just the vast ocean navigator that disappeared." "You mean the demon purification pot is gone too? I can't feel the path of reincarnation anymore. The concealing divine seal is gone too. The creation divine prison is gone too." Han Fei extended his hand and the blood sky blade appeared in his hand. Han Fei was a little confused. The supreme nature treasure was gone, but the creation blood sky blade was still there. What did it mean? Shimin Linglan said, "These things are all with you. It's impossible for them to be gone. If you could still use them in the time river just now, but you can't now, it can only mean that this era is rejecting them." Han Fei narrowed his eyes. "Or rather, it's not a repulsion, but that these things also exist in this era." Han Fei couldn't help but think that the vast ocean navigator came from the chaotic era. If there was a vast ocean navigator in this era, there would obviously be a paradox if you took it out. It could only be said that when two identical objects appeared, there would be conflicts. This world instinctively would only accept what was in the current era and not what Han Fei brought. And the creation blood sky blade could exist, probably because it didn't exist in this era at all. In other words, the blood sky blade was forged by later generations. There was no other blood sky blade here, so it could exist. Then what should we do now? I can't feel my origin star at all. All the resources inside seem to be isolated together. Han Fei was not surprised. After all, this was not the same era as his era at all. This was the early stage of the appearance of all races. We can only take it one step at a time. We should find a native creature to understand the situation of the chaotic era first. Rumble. Suddenly, in the sky above the sea of stars, a great Tao crack appeared and spread out for billions of kilometers. Han Fei and Shimin Linglan were both shocked. A god-slaying level powerhouse died? The two of them had just entered the chaotic era, but they immediately welcomed the death of a god-slaying level powerhouse? Han Fei and Shimin Linglan immediately scanned around with their perception, only to find a group of 7 or 8 people rushing through the sea of stars in their direction. Han Fei and Shimin Linglan looked at each other, both reading surprise in each other's eyes. This was definitely not a coincidence. In the vast sea of stars, as soon as they appeared, they encountered a human powerhouse. At the moment when Han Fei and Xia Xiaochan spread out their perceptions, the 8 people who were running over seemed to notice something wrong and their perception swept towards them. The 8 people on the other side were also stunned, as if wondering why their compatriots appeared in this place. Bang! 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 Before Han Fei and Shimin Linglan could meet the other party, they saw that in this broken piece of the Sea of Stars, a divine vine broke through the ruins and seemed to be chasing those people. In his perception, a group of more than 30 top powerhouses were chasing the 8 of them. These powerhouses were obviously from the ancient demon plant lineage, because a few of them even looked like trees or demonic flowers. A pink sea of flowers blocked the 8 of them. In the sea of flowers, a pink flower bloomed. In the middle of the flower stood a woman with tentacles on her head and wearing a purple robe. The woman's face was cold. As she raised her hand, pink petals, like vortexes in the sea of stars or spinning blades, instantly spanned billions of kilometers. Wherever they passed, the broken stars and the ruins were all shattered by them. There was also a sea-quelling divine tree that controlled endless vines, which swept across the ruins like a tsunami. There was also a girl who turned out to be the main force of the other party. She held a green leaf longbow and shot continuously in the sky. As the arrows left the bow, infinite laws between the heavens and earth quickly gathered on the arrows, turning into galloping giant beasts that ran wildly in the sea of stars, looking wild and extraordinary. The human sea-quelling god took out a golden bell and covered the other 7. Han Fei's pupils were constricted. He had seen this bell before. In the battle of the divine descendants, there was a page in old Han's god sealing heavenly book that recorded the power of this golden bell. It was also this golden bell that protected the entire city of divine descendants. However, old Han's golden bell was just a power preserved by the god sealing heavenly book, not the golden bell itself. He never expected to see the original body of this bell here. Roar. In the golden bell, the expressions of the 7 god-slaying powerhouses changed drastically. My emperor, let us out. We can still fight. Shut up. It's no longer your turn to attack here. Heavens, you be *starred, you set up an ambush here. But even so, do you think you can escape today? The woman holding the longbow shouted. Obviously, she had seen Han Fei and Shimin Linglan and thought that they were the strong masters of the human race, lying in ambush here. As for the young man called Songtian, he was also very dumbfounded, thinking to himself, when did I set up an ambush here? However, the other party was clearly humans, human powerhouses. He couldn't be wrong about this. Could it be people arranged by the prophet? Songtian shouted, don't just stand there. Come and help. Han Fei was speechless. Is this person's name Songtian? Doesn't it mean heavens? Shimin Linglan's expression changed slightly. Ancient demon plants. The other party has 3 sea-quelling gods. Han Fei's face also sank slightly. He knew that there must be many strong masters in the chaotic era, but he didn't expect there to be so many. He had casually encountered so many sea-quelling gods. It was ridiculous. At this moment, the fist light in the sky shattered the pink petals one after another. The power of the consecutive arrows surged and shook the world. In addition, there were 4 divine swords floating beside him. All of them were extraordinary. They had left their master and cut off the vine tide, alone, blocking the sea-quelling divine tree. This meant that these 4 swords had to be supreme nature treasures. Shimin Linglan looked at Han Fei. Shall we help them? Han Fei roughly judged the strength of the 2 parties and said, yes. It shouldn't be a coincidence that we're here, and at this point, let's try to integrate into the ancient human race first. As soon as Han Fei said so, Shimin Linglan took the lead to attack. Behind her, the time tide erupted, and the tide suddenly appeared in the sky above the battlefield like a waterfall, sweeping down overwhelmingly. Time-splitting, raging sea tide. Although Shimin Linglan had just entered the sea-quelling god level, she couldn't be counted as an ordinary sea-quelling god at all. That was a sea-quelling god of the time temple. Coupled with the 6 divine techniques of time, she might be lacking in head-on combat, but in terms of means, she had many. If she was given enough time, she might be able to compete with a Dominator-level powerhouse. Besides, Han Fei had already asked around. The sea-quelling god that Shimin Linglan had become had at least 10 million points of source power. In terms of head-on combat, Han Fei was no match for Shimin Linglan. Sure enough, as soon as Shimin Linglan took action, she directly blocked the attack of the ancient demon plant. The tidal-like vines, the petals in the field, and the arrows that looked like a beast tide were shattered by the time tide that entered the arena in the blink of an eye. Buzz. For a moment, the ancient demon plants all slowed down, and the woman in the flower shouted, "Be careful. It's a time-type powerhouse above god level. I'll stop her." With that, purple flowers appeared in the sea of stars. Swish. 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 As the flowers spun and bloomed, dense vortexes appeared, and the void shattered one after another. In the blink of an eye, black holes appeared one after another in the sea of stars billions of kilometers long. Han Fei felt that the laws here had collapsed, so had the laws of time. At this moment, the little girl holding a longbow bent her bow and shot angrily. 10,000 arrows lined up and shot straight at Shimin Linglan. Seeing this, how could Han Fei allow it? He tapped his feet and instantly appeared on the battlefield. He shouted in a low voice, "Immortal slaying." The blood sky blade flew out of his hand and instantly drew the laws of the world here. Activated by source power, it slashed out, and the 10,000 arrows along the way shattered. Han Fei didn't stop. Instead, he extended his hand and pointed at the bow. Holding girl. Sword 5, shattering. Swish. A sword light ignored the confinement of laws and instantly appeared not far in front of the girl. The girl was shocked. She jumped back and spewed out a pale green arrow from the mouth. Swish. Boom boom. This explosion annihilated the massive ruins here, and the area within tens of millions of kilometers almost turned into a vacuum. The collision ripples swept out billions of kilometers. Ha ha ha. As expected of the powerhouses of our human race. The group of god-slaying level powerhouses trapped in the Golden Bell all looked overjoyed. They didn't expect the visitor to be so powerful. Someone shouted, "It must be the reinforcements arranged by the master." Prophet. The prophet is proficient in divination. He clearly calculated that we would be in trouble. That's right. This battle will be interesting. My emperor, let us out. It's time for us to fight back. Song Tian didn't hesitate either. His body turned into the size of a star, and he struck out several times, shattering the heavens and laws. Every time he slapped down, the sky seemed to collapse, instantly flattening the chaotic power of the laws here, opening a way for those god-slaying level powerhouses to go straight to the god-slaying level powerhouses of the ancient demon plants. Then, the golden bell was retracted, and on the human side, someone couldn't wait to take the lead to attack. Holding the sky-opening giant axe, he charged at the more than 30 strong masters on the opposite side like a ferocious beast out of its cage. The others didn't fall behind and roared. Someone slapped the opposite side with a strange spiritual treasure that looked like a pot lid. Someone opened his mouth and swallowed hundreds of star cores, his body ignited, and his blood and chi soared to the sky. 8 arms grew out of his body and slashed at the billions of plants. Someone activated a secret technique and forcibly upgraded himself, summoning a star river. He actually used the star river as a knife and slashed at the opposite side like a lunatic. Han Fei had seen battles between god-slaying level powerhouses, but they were definitely not as crazy as these people. Was this even called a battle? This was called risking your life. Of course, the ancient demon plants on the opposite side were not weak at all. The two groups of people rushed at each other and fought until the sky was dark. Even though their bodies were pierced and torn apart, they were still fighting as if their bodies were not broken at all. The corners of Han Fei's mouth twitched. He felt like a modern person watching the savage battles of primitive people. Time cycle. Suddenly, Han Fei found that the immortal slaying slash and the sort of shattering he used just now appeared again. He couldn't help but look at Shiman Linglan. This was clearly deliberately done by Shiman Linglan, as if she wanted to temporarily protect the secret that he also knew the great Tao of time. Han Fei understood and suddenly heard the human powerhouse shout, "Brother! Help me block the other party's super powerhouse above the god level." Above god level? Just now, he heard the woman in the flower mention a powerhouse above the god level. She seemed to be referring to the sea-quelling god. Obviously, the realms that Han Fei and the others knew were those slowly adjusted and refined at the end of the primordial era. They were definitely different from the realms in the chaotic era. At this moment, the bow-holding girl was temporarily trapped in the time cycle by Shiman Linglan, and Shiman Linglan was dealing with the sea-quelling god in the pink flower alone. Song Tian didn't hesitate and left the sea-quelling divine tree to Han Fei. Of course, Han Fei knew what he was thinking. The other party had too many god-slaying level powerhouses. Although the human powerhouses were brave, they were all injured in the face of more than 30 god-slaying level ancient demon plants. It was too difficult to kill the other party's god-slaying level powerhouses, but the 7 of them were surrounded by enemies on all sides. If they were not careful, they might die. Therefore, Song Tian must be going to kill some god-slaying level ancient demon plants first. Song Tian, how dare you? Song Tian grinned coldly. Why wouldn't I dare? We just took a few fruits from you. Is this worth your chasing us all the way here? Swish. 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 As he spoke, the sea-quelling divine tree had already taken action. If Song Tian succeeded, they would definitely suffer heavy losses. The sea-quelling divine tree was also a little excited. Billions of green Leaves cut through the void and swept at Han Fei, trying to temporarily stop Han Fei so that he could turn to stop Song Tian. However, Han Fei certainly couldn't let it go. With a bang, Han Fei turned into tens of thousands of lightning marks, ignoring the green leaves, each of which was almost comparable to a blow from a god. Han Fei roared, source power surged, and the silencing fist swept across the sky, crushing infinite green leaves along the way, heading straight for the sea-quelling divine tree. Seeing this, a thick branch that could hang stars swept over. Rumble. With a bang, Han Fei was sent flying, but at that moment, he also used the draw technique to cut off the other party's branch. Han Fei thought to himself, after all, I'm not a real sea-quelling god. If such a violent battle lasts for more than an hour, I'm afraid I won't be able to hold on. Besides, 8 million combat power was still a little lacking in the face of these abnormal powerhouses from the chaotic era. Although the sea-quelling divine tree didn't seem to be much stronger, the other party's strength was definitely more than 8 million. Bang! 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 Fortunately, at this moment, Song Tian had already killed 3 god-slaying powerhouses in a row. Then, Song Tian couldn't help but glance at Han Fei in surprise. This guy took that blow with his body? Wasn't he comparable to him in strength? The ancient demon plant also realized that Han Fei and Shiman Linglan were quite strong. Therefore, the woman in the pink flower decisively shouted, "Retreat." They didn't know that Han Fei used secret methods to improve his strength, and the law of time was too strange. It would be too troublesome to fight against it. If they continued to fight, they would suffer a loss even if they had more people. Therefore, she immediately realized something and chose to retreat. The moment she proposed to retreat, she attacked together with the sea-quelling divine tree, crushing this world and the time cycle technique with laws, and releasing the bow-holding girl. Han Fei and Shiman Linglan were both surprised. These people clearly didn't know the law of time, but they immediately found a way to crack it. After all, the law of time was also one of the laws of the world. As long as it was completely disrupted with the power of this world, the law of time would be broken. Of course, this method was only suitable for fighting someone in the same realm. If a powerhouse at the level of the Master of Time was here, he would be the world. The other party wouldn't be able to break his power no matter what. At the same time, pink petals formed a law barrier, blocking the punch from Song Tian. Although the law barrier was broken, the god-slaying level powerhouses of the ancient demon plants were not stupid. They reacted quickly and retreated. Seeing that the other party had stopped, Han Fei and Shiman Linglan naturally wouldn't attack again. It was already enough to help Song Tian. They had just come to the chaotic era, so it was meaningless for them to start a long-lasting battle. Song Tian laughed. Fight. Why don't you fight anymore? Seeing the strong masters of the ancient demon plant retreat one after another, Song Tian had no intention of chasing them. He extended his hand and the 4 long swords disappeared into his body in the blink of an eye. The seriously injured god-slaying level powerhouses of the human race immediately rushed over. Among them, there was a burly man with a broken arm. He reached out and directly ripped off this arm. Then, one of the women triggered divine brilliance that illuminated everyone. The injuries of the 7 people recovered by more than half in the blink of an eye. The law of life? But incomplete. But even so, Han Fei couldn't help being surprised. These people were Ridiculously strong. In later generations, there were almost no people who understood the law of life, but as soon as he came to the chaotic era, he found that someone had mastered such a law. Song Tian's burly body dissipated and returned to its normal size. With a magnificent aura, he looked at Han Fei and Shiman Linglan with judgment. How should I address you? From the words of the heavens, Han Fei could feel that this was a very domineering person. Even if he and Shiman Linglan helped him survive a great tribulation, the other party's first words were not gratitude, but judgment and suspicion. As the human emperor, Han Fei hadn't abdicated yet, so he was also used to being domineering. He raised his head slightly. My name is Wang Han. This is my wife, Shiman Linglan. Oh? Song Tian couldn't help but look at Shiman Linglan. Your wife's Tao is unique. To be able to walk the great Tao of time to this point, she is really extraordinary. Shiman Linglan nodded slightly, her tone neither servile nor overbearing. It seemed that she didn't like the attitude of the heavens, but she didn't want to embarrass the other party, so she stiffly replied, You flatter me. Pa. Song Tian cupped his fists. Thank you for today. Behind him, the 7 god-slaying level powerhouses also cupped their fists. Thank you. However, at this moment, the 7 of them were more vigilant. Clearly, they had discovered something wrong. Han Fei smiled. You're welcome. We're all human beings. I shouldn't just sit idle. However, Song Tian looked at Han Fei deeply. You don't know me? Han Fei shook his head. No, who are you? Behind Song Tian, the woman who had mastered the law of life said, This is our emperor, the emperor of the human race. As humans, you two don't know the human emperor? Human emperor? Shiman Linglan couldn't help but look at Han Fei, and Han Fei was a little speechless. What the hell is going on? He had encountered the first human emperor just like that? Han Fei was sure that this was definitely the first human emperor. This was because the strength of this human emperor was only at the sea-quelling god level now. Besides, the 6 ancient lineages had clearly not been unified yet. Han Fei's face remained unchanged as he looked at Song Tian. I don't know him. Song Tian grinned. Interesting. Brother Wang, where are you from? Do you have any clansmen? Han Fei shook his head. No. Han Fei didn't know the composition of the human race in the chaotic era. Since the human race was one of the 6 ancient lineages, they should have come from the divine vine. However, how the human race developed to this point was almost unknown to future generations. This secret had long disappeared in the long river of history. Therefore, Han Fei's answer was simple. Song Tian could ask him, and he could choose not to answer. Also as human emperors, Han Fei felt that if Song Tian was human emperors, he would definitely have the magnanimity of human emperors. Ha ha ha. Sure enough, Song Tian laughed but looked straight at Han Fei. Wang Han, you are the first human to be so calm and domineering in front of me. Han Fei shrugged and still looked at Song Tian. You probably came out earlier than me. Otherwise, it's hard to say who will be the human emperor. How dare you? The 7 god-slaying level powerhouses behind Song Tian were grateful to Han Fei a moment ago, but now they were only angry. Shiman Linglan's gaze swept across them, and her divine might vaguely appeared, making their hearts palpitate. However, this group of people was obviously not ordinary. They didn't have much respect for a sea-quelling god, so the scene was a little tense. Santian smiled and said, "For some reason, I'm not surprised to hear that. From you. Since you think you can do it, why don't we fight?" Okay. This was an indescribable feeling. When Han Fei and Santian stood opposite each other, both of them had a subtle feeling in their hearts. That feeling was a threat, a very strong threat. Shiman Linglan couldn't help but look at Han Fei. Han Fei was using a secret method. If he kept fighting with the power of a sea-quelling god, he wouldn't be able to last long. Han Fei looked at Shiman Linglan with a smile. "It's okay. I'm just testing my hand. With the combat power of the sea-quelling god, there might be times when he was no match for Han Fei, but this didn't mean that he couldn't fight. Just like the three strong masters of the ancient demon plant just now, Han Fei had only fought the sea-quelling divine tree once, but he knew that the other party's combat power was definitely more than 10 million. However, when Shiman Linglan used the 6 divine techniques of time, she could also break the joint attack of the 3 sea-quelling gods. Of course, this was not because Shiman Linglan was stronger, but because of the use of laws and divine techniques. Of course, if the gap in combat power was too great, no matter how many laws and means he had, it would be very difficult for him to fight. If he encountered someone like fifth senior brother, he might not be able to withstand 2 slaps. Han Fei had seen what Santian just did. It wasn't very strong. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been chased by the 3 strong masters of the ancient demon plant. At this moment, the two of them looked at each other and instantly moved billions of kilometers away. Neither of them had any pleasantries. Santian didn't use a supreme nature treasure, but punched Han Fei head-on like rain. Han Fei's eyelids twitched. Hand-to-hand combat? It seemed that the heavens were very confident in his physique. Han Fei also wanted to see how big the physique gap between him and a sea-quelling god-level powerhouse was. Immediately, Han Fei also punched out with a dazzling fist light. Bang! 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 Boom, boom, boom. Not far away, Shiman Linglan was a little worried. She was afraid that the two of them would fight too fiercely. As for the god-slaying level powerhouses of the human race, they looked relaxed. Someone smiled and said, "This person wants to fight our emperor head-on? Unfortunately, he doesn't know our emperor's physique at all." Someone clicked his tongue and shook his head. "I bet he will retreat in 3 seconds." Someone chuckled. "In terms of head-on battles, our emperor has never lost." Someone said disdainfully, "I admit that this person is strong, but he's still far from competing with our emperor." Humph. Shiman Linglan snorted coldly. When they heard this, they just looked sideways and didn't take it seriously at all. On the battlefield, Han Fei and Santian couldn't help but look surprised when their fists collided. However, he discovered that Santian's fist light carried an extremely domineering destructive power mixed with the powerful power of space, the power of fire origin, and the continuous concept of waves. As soon as he attacked, the fist light poured out like a river tide. Perhaps he couldn't feel anything in the initial clash, but once he exchanged 1,000 punches, he would find that he had fallen into the other party's continuous attacks. This kind of weakness was not because his combat power was weak, but because he was weaker than he had expected. After all, the first human emperor was an existence who swept across the 6 lineages and dominated all races. But if he couldn't crush him, how could he rule all races? What surprised Song Tian was that this person's physique was extraordinary. Furthermore, the other party's fist light revealed a strong killing intent. That power was trying to enter his body and destroy the operation of his origin power. More importantly, he also felt extreme dominance from Han Fei. It was a temperament that could only be obtained from endless killing. This meant that this person had definitely experienced countless battles. However, in this chaos, if there was such a strong master, he should have known. Boom. 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 Bam. 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 3 seconds passed in a flash. The sea of stars where the two of them were fighting had long collapsed. Ripples spread out continuously, each representing a head-on clash between the two of them. At this moment, the few god-slaying level powerhouses of the human race couldn't help but look solemn. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The two sides finally retreated temporarily, and the void storm in the sea of stars where they wreaked havoc. The energy tide poured down endlessly, and the laws of the heavens were in chaos. Song Tian laughed. Interesting. Let's fight again. Roar. The sky turned into a giant comparable to a star, and his chi and blood died. The sea of stars red. As for Han Fei, he also roared and his Dharma idol rose from the ground, turning into a dazzling golden body that was 330,000 feet tall. However, it was still too small, compared to a star. However, at the level of the sea-quelling god, the size of his Dharma idol was no longer a limit. 330,000 feet was just the length most suitable for fighting, but it didn't mean that it couldn't become bigger. Faced with the first human emperor, Han Fei didn't want his momentum to be overshadowed by the other party. His Dharma idol world expanded crazily again. And in the blink of an eye, it changed to the size of a star. 2 star giants were fighting in the sea of stars. On Han Fei's side, thunder rumbled, and on Song Tian's side, angry palms pushed forward, and stars surrounded him. After 100 seconds of fierce fighting, the two giants dissipated, and sword light and knife intent wreaked havoc on the field. Han Fei used the draw technique, 10,000 knives in one, carefree roaming, and the sort of breaking. Song Tian didn't use his supreme nature treasure, the 4 swords. Instead, he condensed swords with his fingertips, and at their craziest moment, he even turned the billions of kilometers of starry sky into a sword shape. This round was another tie. At this moment, the human god-slaying level powerhouses no longer commented, and their expressions became abnormally solemn. Han Fei asked, "How much did you use?" Song Tian was not afraid of revealing any secrets. He laughed heartily and said, "Only 50%. Unfortunately, you don't have a top weapon. If I use all my strength, it will be an unfair victory." Han Fei also chuckled. "Same to you. I still have some trump cards that I haven't used. Otherwise, I'm afraid you won't be able to withstand it." Heh. How arrogant. How about this? Let's decide the winner in one move. Okay. Song Tian suddenly trembled, so did this piece of sea of stars. As he opened his mouth and took a deep breath, he swallowed the sky. Bang! In the next moment, golden light dazzled on Song Tian, and a power that Han Fei was extremely familiar with bloomed. The path of invincibility? Han Fei's pupils were constricted slightly. Could it be that the threat he felt didn't come from Song Tian's identity as the human emperor, but from his path of invincibility? It was said that only one person could walk the path of invincibility. The others who walked the path of invincibility were all enemies. However, Han Fei didn't know about it before. Now that Song Tian's path of invincibility had been activated, Han Fei had to fight. This was no longer a spar, but a competition on the path of invincibility. The god-slaying level powerhouses of the human race all shouted, "Our emperor is invincible. Since the path of invincibility has appeared, our emperor is invincible. Our emperor is awesome." Buzz. However, before they could rejoice, they saw that Han Fei's body was shining with golden light, his blood was steaming, and dragon roars were echoing in his bloodline. The human powerhouses were all shocked. What? Ridiculous. My emperor, defeat him. Seeing this, the corners of Shimin Linglan's mouth curled up slightly. From a young age, she had already been certain that Han Fei was her king. In the history of the human race she knew, Han Fei had never been defeated. At this moment, Song Tian was also shocked. The feeling in his heart was right. This person was very strong, ridiculously strong. But if this person was so strong and had even become a sea-quelling god, it was impossible for him to only have so little combat power. However, Song Tian couldn't care less. He punched out, and the brilliant heavenly might seemed to be added to his body. Han Fei also looked solemn. It was not that he couldn't be defeated, but as the human emperor, he wouldn't lose without a fight. He had an undefeated heart. Although Song Tian's combat power was stronger than his, and this punch was indeed extremely powerful, making him feel afraid that he would be defeated. How could he be willing to give up without a battle? Destruction Divine Fist. Time-splitting. It hadn't been long since Han Fei had mastered the 6 divine techniques of time, and he could only unleash 3-layer attacks when he activated the time-splitting technique. It was equivalent to launching 3 destruction divine fists. At this moment, he couldn't care less about hiding the great Tao of time and really attacked with all his strength. Bang! Rumble! Billions of voids collapsed, and rays of light burst out on the battlefield. The sky was full of brilliance, and the Tao patterns of the heavens shattered. The void storm surged like a wave, submerging the two of them. In the field, Han Fei and Song Tian were both cracked and dripping with blood. However, Han Fei was blasted back tens of millions of kilometers, while Song Tian only retreated 1,000,000 kilometers. Huff. Ha ha ha. Song Tian laughed. Good, Wang Han, you're not bad. The law of life surged in Han Fei's body. You're not bad either, but let's end the fight here. Buzz. Before the power completely dissipated, Han Fei immediately returned to Shimin Linglan. At the same time, Song Tian immediately returned to the god-slaying level. Humans. Buzz. Their strengths were both declining at a visible speed. Han Fei couldn't help cursing, and Song Tian opposite him was also shocked. A great monarch? Are you a war general? Not only Han Fei and the sky, but even Shimin Linglan and the human cultivators were shocked. Song Tian asked in surprise, "Do you cultivate the supreme technique?" Han Fei narrowed his eyes. You too? Han Fei couldn't help but feel incredulous. His experience was too similar to Song Tian's. They walked the same path of invincibility, cultivated the same supreme divine technique, and walked the same path of the human emperor. They were exactly the same. Song Tian looked at Han Fei up and down again. Are you the successor of the first supreme? The first supreme? Han Fei's heart stirred, and then he shook his head slightly. I don't know. The first supreme you mentioned, but this supreme divine technique was indeed taught to me by someone else. Song Tian frowned. Then he must be the first supreme. Perhaps he didn't expose his true identity to you. This old thing actually found another successor. No wonder your path is so similar to mine. Forget it. Has that old man gone to that path now? Which path? Han Fei said, the person who taught me this technique didn't meet me but taught me this technique through an altar. Although Han Fei didn't know who the so-called first supreme Song Tian mentioned was, he was very likely related to the supreme divine technique, or even the creator of the supreme divine technique. His supreme divine technique came from the god of war, and the god of war had indeed never met him. It was indeed only taught through the altar. There was no problem with him saying that. No matter how he taught you, he must have taken a fancy to you. Since that old man has taken a fancy to you, it means that you have the bearing to be the supreme. By the way, what is the great monarch you mentioned just now?